This is a video compilation of my 5 other shorter videos covering Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood and my review of my first time watching it. My videos were made watching the show in chunks based on the show's openings, meaning that you're getting my first reaction to each fifth of the show as the video progresses. There will be short moments between where one video ends and another begins, where I highlight that is what is happening, so I think it should be pretty easy to follow. Enjoy. I don't watch anime. I'd even go as far as to say that I don't even like anime. I mean, I've seen anime when I was younger, and I look back fondly on some of it, and there are even others that have come out recently I can admit that I had a pretty good time with. But those are the exceptions to the rule. For the most part, anime, it ain't for me. So I've noticed that I'm in a unique power position of being able to look at an anime, and if I think it's good, then that's gotta be a ringing endorsement. I'm not saying my opinion is intrinsically correct, but it's just if something like this wins me over, that's really something for me. And if I don't like a show you like, and you don't think I'm at least entertaining about it, then, well, it's the internet. You get to attack my character brutally with no consequences. But I also think there might be a phenomenon in this subculture where the little 90-second music videos that play before every episode can sometimes be such heaters and so visually compelling that they can sometimes trick people into thinking a show is better than it is. Because no matter how much I don't care for anime in general, I can admit often the openings go fucking crazy. So I ask you this, did you like Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood, or was the opening just good? First off, we gotta get some things out of the way. Have I seen this before? I've seen maybe 3/4 of it a while ago. I barely remember anything, but I did technically watch the episodes. The light from them hit my retinas. But there's some really important shit in my brain, bro. Stuff I need, so maybe they just got filtered out. I don't know. There are going to be random spoilers in this, by the way, because of that, so... The things I do remember, I remember one of the people turns into a big green monster. There's also another guy digging a tunnel, and I think that's about it. And we're only talking about the first 14 episodes. Why? Because that's the number of episodes that the first opening covers. You may have been tricked into liking the show by the second opening, but that's not what we're talking about today. That's not for me to say. So anyway, finally, the review. Okay, so the opening. Right out the gate, I think probably has to be one of the more beloved ones, if I'm reading the room right. I still don't know what the hell this thing is, but I assume it's gotta be pretty important since it's the first thing you see in the entire show. But yeah, anyway, obviously the opening's pretty good. Usually in an anime opening, at least for a show like this, I'm looking for something with a little more intensity, something to get the blood pumping, and it does get there briefly, but honestly, these first 14 episodes aren't a lot of that kind of stuff anyway, so I think it's kind of appropriate. I also like this little beat of Edward seemingly reaching out for his mother in this first shot, and then the comparison of him doing the same motion only a few shots later, but as if he's going to fight someone. And fight who? It's his bastard of a father, of course. Cool little detail. The first handful of shots cover their backstory that just sounds like they're trying to one-up someone else with their sad past. Our dad left us when we were like 7, and then our mom got plagued into the ground. Oh yeah? And then I became a double amputee, and my brother was also amputated too. All of them. He was amputated. Yeah, and on top of all that, our fucking house burned down. Like, okay, man, I get it. Your backstory is tragic. Jesus Christ. Of course, we get our anime standard, a bunch of the secondary characters doing one quick motion, either denoting their power or their personality, or if you're really lucky, sometimes you can get away with both. At least the cast isn't so staggeringly large at the moment that they can't even get away with that, so thank you. My only 2 real critiques of this whole opening are, 1, the shot of Edward running forward. I don't know, just looks a bit goofy to me, not quite at home with the quality of the rest of the opening. And this hilarious shot where Edward gets 2 limbs blasted off brutally, changing his body for life. Alphonse is annihilated from the physical plane entirely, and Winry gets like a light to medium jostling. She's like, whoa! I get that it's supposed to be probably her emotional turmoil with the whole thing. She's had a rough time too, but in the face of having to take your shoe off to count to 10 and being erased, not even a corpse to bury, it's just a little funny to me. Overall though, I like the music and the visuals pair nicely, and this explosion looks really good. I get why you like the opening. But now the show, what we're really talking about. Oh wait, subbed or dubbed? Oh, dub just gets there. Very close battle. I know some anime purists out there are gonna be like, he watched dubbed, he's a fake fan. And 1, you're correct. But 2, I feel like if I watch dubbed, it's at least something I can comment on rather than it being in Japanese. I don't know if these guys are giving a good performance. I don't even know if they're saying what the subtitles say. This show could be about something entirely different as far as I know. And I don't have a Duolingo sponsorship, so whoever thinks I'm learning Japanese at age 55, you can all go to hell. I swear though, if this ever lands unsubbed, I'll do it and even make an ass of of myself by trying to talk about the performances. Okay, now finally, the real show, 14 episodes. I have praise and I have criticism. Don't you worry about that. Let's talk about the writing. For the most part, I think overall it's pretty strong. I like the slow bleed of information. Very much in episode 1, we're just thrown into a situation. There's an evil Iceman. He fucks hard. He's doing some grand scale thing to destroy a city. Good, let me in there. I love it. How does this magic work? I don't know. There's some circles you need, except you totally don't. Like there's Edward and his teacher that don't need the circles, but you can also just have a circle tattooed on your hand, or wear gloves, or I assume have a tattoo anywhere on your body, or wear a cool jacket or shoes with circles on them. Anyway, not the point. We'll circle back around to that. We have our two young protagonists, Edward and Alphonse, and they already have a reputation to upkeep. I love it. Trust me, I love a good coming of age, finding yourself and finding your power story, but when a character starts the story and they're already formidable, I think that's a very often unused choice, and it's a lot of fun. So we're starting with aces here. The show's ahead, and the first episode starts the lovely little slow bleed of info I think this show does so well. It shows the magic system is diverse, applicable in a ton of situations, and you can be clever with it. It shows there's some unrest for unknown reasons in the military for what the country is doing or has already done. Very interesting. It keeps cutting to this bring me the horizon motherfucker sitting in a jail cell for no reason doing an evil voice. And it ends the episode with a lovely little teaser of more important villains to come. Great. This first episode really isn't even anything. It doesn't really set any plot in motion. It just puts a bunch of interesting shit in front of you and makes you ask questions about it, which is a pretty cool approach to an opening episode. There's of course pros and cons, but it's like when your English teacher used to tell you you have to grab your reader with your first sentence. They just took that idea and dedicated a whole episode to it. Good idea too, because I am interested. But you can't just show interesting stuff in your show and not have someone your audience cares about to frame it around, and that's where Edward and Alphonse come in. Alphonse, it's like a cheat code. You've got this little kid sounding voice, very timid, almost constantly frightened sounding in this giant hulking suit of armor. It's like, how are you not instantly endeared to that? Edward's a bit different in this first episode. I don't think he really jumps out at you as much as you want in an opening episode. He's very competent and cool, and everyone talks a big game about him, like I said, but other than that, he just seems like a polite, discerning young man. Not quite iconic main character material just yet. But that does change as things go on. I really start to like Edward as we move forward. While polite and discerning, yes, he's also incredibly driven, morally stalwart, and meaningfully selfless. And what I mean by that is that the two always talk about getting their bodies back to normal, and I'm sure while Edward getting his limbs back would be a killer bonus for him, you get the feeling nearly every time it's brought up, Edward is only really talking about getting Alphonse's body back, which I think makes for a great hero, a giant goal with mostly selfless intentions. I also think it's a cool beat that Edward is very skeptical about any kind of religion because that thing he met claimed to be God, so praying to whatever that was doesn't seem like something he'd ever care to do. I'm afraid though the show hasn't used them as effectively as I'd like so far. I know, it probably changes later, but in these first 14 episodes, it's a lot of studying or being laid up from injuries or flashing back to their childhoods or being in a mechanical village where they just don't get to do anything. We'll get to that. In the moments where Edward gets to be active and be cool and smart, I think he's great. The show even goes out of its way to show that he's very intelligent, which goes hand in hand with the magic system. He basically has to be smart to do any of this in the first place, which I think is a great choice. And actually, now that I mention it, let's talk about the magic system for a moment. While I do think it's cool, I think explained or at least healthily implied limitations in a magic system is very important. And you should think with a show that literally starts with a dictionary definition of how the magic works, we should be good. You take one thing, use its chemical and physical makeup to make another thing. It makes perfect sense. I get it. That's why when they took 20 pounds of carbon and some limestone and a few pipe cleaners or whatever to try and conjure their mom, it made sense. That's why when he makes a spear out of the floor, it makes sense. He's just changing the shape of the material that was already there. I like it. But here's where I get confused. So it's all about creating something from something else. That's what alchemy is. So where in the alchemy handbook is throwing fireballs outlined, or just mostly earthbending on massive scales like Edward seems to have made his go-to moves, or turning water to ice or steam? Okay, well maybe that would make more sense because there's like a physical state change there, but you get what I'm saying. I'm still ignorant to a lot of this series, of course, but I'm just not sure where the law of equivalent exchange really applies to making building-sized earth pillars over and over. I'll willingly eat crow if someone can explain it to me, or the giant fireballs. Anyway, back to Edward. I think his voice actor has a pretty great range. He can capture a lot of subtle emotion in his line reads, which seems important for who Edward is at the moment. I had this thought about halfway through the season where there's that really sort of goofy scene I felt where Winry cries for him, and I'm not sure if the feeling I get from that scene is if it's Edward has used up all the tears he has for that situation with his mom, or if he just isn't letting himself feel that end of his emotional spectrum anymore. And I think it would be much more interesting if it was the latter. I don't know at all, of course, if this is part of any arc he has, but it seems like Edward holds himself to the standards of your classic macho man. He wants to be big and strong. He wants to be stoic and put on a brave face for his loved ones and lead them through the dark. Which makes sense. The two people he's closest to are his little brother and a girl he's probably gonna end up liking. And while all those qualities are admirable, they also have an unhealthy side if committed to too strongly, of not letting yourself be truly human, feeling what you feel, letting people help you. There's even the shot in the very next episode, like it's framed like it looks like he's going to cry. You would think that would be the point of this shot, but he doesn't. And I find that very interesting. I think it would be a wonderful, often unexplored arc for Edward if he held these values now and over the course of the show grew to have a healthier idea of what it is to be a man, whether it be through his emotions or, even though it's constantly played for a joke, his height. I hope it goes that way. If not, the show can still be good, obviously. Speaking of jokes though, we gotta talk about this. What the fuck is going on, guys? There are 3 jokes in the show, maybe 3.5 if you're being generous. Joke 1, someone calls Edward short and he gets really, really mad. Joke 2, someone mistakes Alphonse for the Fullmetal Alchemist and Edward gets really, really mad. Joke 3, someone does some really over-the-top anime shit and everyone is very shocked or starts yelling in surprise. Joke point 5, the characters are drawn in their very low detailed chibi forms. This joke is often applied as a combo to jokes 1 through 3, and that's it. These 3 jokes are repeated episode in, episode out, ad nauseum, and I get that, okay, it's a fun shonen anime, have some goofy moments. Even if you don't have some really sharp comedic writing, it's not all that annoying. What I find troublesome is that there's some real tonal whiplash with some of them though. Like, we can go from being in a really rather tense, serious scene to doing one of these 3 jokes not 10 seconds later. For example, remember that scene where there's a girl that's been brainwashed by the church that has just been ordered by the priest to shoot our main characters? And you're kind of like, holy fuck, this is something. And then less than a minute later, still pretty adjacent to that exact situation, and it's like, oh, never mind, we're goofy again. There was one singular scene that actually used a combination of these jokes that I found funny though, in episode 8. Beside that though, the tonal whiplash is very present. Mostly in the first half of the season though. As it went on, I found the tone tended to stay more serious, which I definitely preferred. And I think that's where the show does its best work, when it's taking itself more seriously. I know it's target demographic and everything, which I'm certainly not in, so maybe throw this entire video in the dumpster. But I do genuinely think when the show slows down and has moments that don't have to be overshadowed by forced anime comedy, it really shines. There are moments in the show that are just meaningfully quiet, and sometimes they're not long, but just those little scenes can pack a big punch, and I welcome them whenever they show up. The show also benefits from the protagonist's backstories being laid out over the course of multiple episodes. We get a look at them when their terrible event happens, and then we move on, and a few episodes later we learn about what their home life was like and their dad, and then a few more episodes down the line we learn about their training and why they're so good. And I think that's usually a pretty good way to do things. Stories can really get bogged down if you have to tell your main character's entire stories right from go. It's a lot of uninteresting screen time to dedicate to characters we don't even know yet, and for stories like this, where their origins are very important to events that are happening, that's information you very much have to get across. So doing it spread out like this to keep things moving into present, I think was a very good move. There's even some really decent metaphorical writing in here. Nothing too crazy, because if it was too crazy, I probably wouldn't get it. So wait, maybe there is some crazy stuff in there then. Anyway, there's the obvious one where Edward retells the story of Icarus to the church girl, where he and his brother are obviously stand-ins for Icarus. They flew too close to the sun in trying to revive their mother, and now have to live with the results. Unfortunately, the show makes that one really even more obvious than it already was later in the same episode, and it's like, come on, man, let me think I'm smart. Stuff like that, and little moments where Alphonse has those moments where he's afraid he's a fake soul in a tin can, and a toy robot hits his feet, and then a kid runs up and grabs it. In that moment, that's how Alphonse feels. Is he just a puppet? A plaything for his older brother, or is he really him? There are really some deeper themes present in this show than most of the other anime schlock I've come across, and a lot of it ties into the story very nicely. There's this theme of transhumanism. What is it to be human? Alphonse is just a soul bonded to some armor, but Edward insists he's still a human. And then you have the crude chimeras, which, well, I guess that counts. I remembered going in that some real deplorable shit happens to this girl, but of course I did. How do you forget something like that? Anyway, they must be human on some level, right? That girl is still in there, somehow, some way, but is being human on some level the same as being human? And then the more advanced chimeras are basically completely human, but with advanced features from animals that are incorporated into them somehow. It's much easier to call these ones humans, but how much more human than the dog girl? Does it matter? Is being human just looking human, or is being human having a soul? And that's where homunculuses come in. They're clearly far removed from being functioning humans, but they act like us, they speak like us, they have flaws and wants like us. Where's the line? What is it to be human? And I think that that's a very interesting question the show poses, even though it hasn't zoomed in its focus on it very far as of yet. And while I love this theme, I really wish they gave Alphonse more time to grapple with it. The question of whether he's real or not is posed to him, and it clearly bothers him, but then that episode ends, and we only get about half an episode of Alphonse trying to wrestle with the idea. That's a big question. That's not something you and your brother reminisce memories over, and then you're just over it. At least I don't think it is. I thought it was very selfish for everyone to get mad at him for blowing up over it. Like, okay, Edward, I'm sure you feel bad about it too, but dude is a voice in a can of Campbell's chicken noodle soup. Let the dude be mad about it. He's pissed. I'd be pissed too. I wouldn't know if I was real either, but Edward sulks off because he's the one that feels bad. Like, be there for your brother, man. He's struggling. And what are you even crying about anyway, Winry? Get real. I would have much preferred if this question was one Alphonse had to struggle with over a longer period of time, because honestly, sometimes he can feel like a bit of a tag-along. He helps with all the studying and little things here and there, and he's good in a fight, but a lot of the time it just feels like he's following Edward around. Him having a big, hard question like that no one can answer for him would have helped him feel like he had more to do in these opening episodes, I feel. Even outside of themes and characters, I find the pacing of the show to be pretty strong as well. It may be a touch slow in places, but you're constantly drip-fed little bits of information about really important stuff. Who are the people with the tattoos? It takes 13 episodes to learn it, and across them you see small moments of them doing some real evil villain shit, but you eventually learn that they're homunculuses. What's going on with the war that happened? I don't know, but this Scar guy seems none too pleased with it. Sure hope he doesn't explode anyone's brain again 2 episodes from now. Philosopher's Stones are clearly a thing, and someone has access to them, and may even know how to create them, but a lot of the information is kept strangely in code and behind a lot of red tape. And when they do find them, why are the ones they find seemingly still very powerful, but prone to breaking? And who's their dad? He seems like a big deal, and then a way bigger deal right as episode 14 closes out. Is he even Edward's dad? I mean, he's built like a brick shithouse, and Alphonse seems to be well on his way, being a year younger than Edward, but Edward's built like a straw piss shack with abs. And that's not even to mention the god they saw. What the hell is that thing? Why is that there? What is that even? Where is that even? Why does it work on a toll system? Why does it seem to mirror the person it's speaking to? There are all these wild unanswered questions that you constantly learn just a bit about as the story moves forward. And having all these questions and then also a story that is actually moving forward at all seems pretty impressive on its own. So a bit of slow pacing, while I can and will bitch and moan about it, can be overlooked once in a while, I believe. In the middle of the season, an episode here and there, it really does get too slow though. There's an entire episode where they kind of just hang out in some mechanic's house and deliver a baby, some character stuff here and there, but very slow. There's an episode where they're just chilling in a hospital after a fight for the most part, when Alphonse has his 2-minute Pinocchio crisis. There's an entire episode about them looking for some dude's notes, running into an anime character, and then trying to decode those notes. I know some of these elements are going to be story important, but they can also eat up a lot of screen time for a show you're just starting out. Outside of these episodes though, pacing, not bad. I just randomly thought, remember when Alphonse gets his memories back of being mind-cratered by God, and for some reason he has this flash from the point of view of the horrible zombie corpse they created? So I figured that means that was actually Alphonse in that abomination, rather than the spirit of their mom. It's revealed in these episodes that making a Philosopher's Stone takes multiple human sacrifices, and I know this isn't the same thing, but I take it that means Alphonse was accidentally used as a human sacrifice, but being only one human, it wasn't enough to make an actually effectively living thing. So it wasn't really their mom, which I guess is better. Like, I'm sure they wouldn't want their mom to be in that state under any circumstances, so I'm sure Alphonse would have gladly tanked it if he had the choice. Anyway, my dumb theory out of the way now, let's circle back around to the voice acting and secondary characters. The main voice cast, for the most part, I think is solid. Edward and Alphonse, I think, do a great job, like I said, but everyone else puts in a good performance. The important ones, anyway. Smaller characters and one-off villains put in performances, but really nothing to talk about, which I guess makes sense. They're not the stars of the show. Who cares? The Fuhrer is really hamming up his nice guy act voice-wise, but that's kind of the point, so I think the voice performance does its job. But man, anyone with the title Fuhrer, you're on the back foot here, dude. You're starting from behind. I already don't trust you, and my sharp intellect has proven me correct once again. Mustang's performance might be the one I'm most critical of, except Lust. It's not that it's a bad performance, or even that it's missing something character-wise. All I can tell about this dude so far is that he's a very serious military man that wants to climb the ladder. He literally just wants to be king and catch Scar, which will hopefully advance his military career so he can become king. So for a character that has so little going on at the moment, it. I guess I don't really expect a blockbuster performance. I got my eye on you though, Roy. I feel like some of the dialogue for the secondary characters is less cared for as well on some level. It's all pretty solid, but then sometimes you get lines like this.
I understand why you think you have an advantage over a man like me, since I possess neither your impenetrable ultimate shield nor an ultimate spear that can pierce any substance.
And I think some people actually really like the "it's a terrible day for rain" line. I don't know, man. It just strikes me as very goofy for such a somber scene. He's at the grave of his dead friend who died in the line of duty, leaving him on the other side of a phone call as he bled out. A lot of very complex emotions tied up there, I'm sure. So the tears I understand, but a hammy line like this? I don't know. This scene, though, is actually what made me think of the Edward's emotional journey plot, though. All these manly military men openly crying, and Edward seems to refuse to. At least outside of Joke Point 5's chibi cut-ins. Hughes is a bit of an annoying anime character. My definition of that term is that it's a character that often extremely over-the-top displays their one character trait, this time being that he loves his family. He's basically the avatar of Joke 3, but anime falls into that trap a lot, the idea that just slapping an adjective on a character is enough to make them a character. It's the worst when it bleeds into not just being annoying to the characters, though, and it actively annoys the audience. And Hughes can very often flirt with that line. For the record, I think his voice actor does well, I just don't have a lot to say about him. There's an interesting through line with Hughes, though. In that episode where the girl and the dog get fused together, horrifyingly, the show always has a bit of an off-putting tone when it comes to that doctor guy, which is good. You can tell some real sideways shit is about to go down, despite the girl being overly loving and happy. And I'm not sure if they meant to do this, but I get the idea that there may have been some sort of through line between Hughes's overly loving attitude and the girl's overly loving attitude that made me feel like some real sideways shit was gonna happen to the Hughes family at some point too. It's a very different outcome, but of course still devastating. Hughes is mostly fine, can be annoying. Okay, seriously, is it just me or did anyone else think Hughes and this Greed guy were the same guy in the opening? I mean, come on, look at them. I thought there was gonna be some twist that he was some weird leather-skinned monster man. Then I guess you've got Vegeta All Might, who, if Hughes was the avatar for Joke 3, he is the embodiment of Joke 3. He can sometimes have a quiet moment, some might say introspective, seems dutiful to a fault, but moments always seem to give way to him ripping his shirt off and the rest of the cast going, wah. And I get it, bro, crazy gains. If I looked like that, I'd want to be showing them off too. Lust sneaks into this list because she recurs pretty often and isn't a slobbering dog person. I know her name is literally Lust, the sultry, I'm going to jump on the next thing I see with a pulse voice is the point, but there's just something I don't like about it. It doesn't work for me. It seems cheesy almost. Scar puts on this gruff voice all the time because he's really serious and tough and tortured, and I believe he's all of those things, but the performance might seem a little one note in the face of the better performances in the show. I'm not sure. You don't see a whole lot of him in these first episodes. He seems interesting though. The war, his retribution, he even had a run-in with the Homunculuses. Man, I hate saying that fucking word. He's a character that has some intrigue to him rather than just the plot, which makes me like him more than I probably should so far, considering how little I've seen of him and how much work the show has put into him. Finally, let's wrap this all up with the action. This show perfectly encapsulates anime action done correctly, if you ask me. I was already kind of falling off of anime at the time, years ago when I stopped watching it, but the thing that literally made me stop was the action, or should I say, the fake action. The fake action where characters stand around and think in their head what's going on in the fight, what their next strategic move is gonna be, how strong their opponent is, their motivation in a fight, and then cut to their friends watching them and commenting on the fight. All of this as they just stand there, not fighting. And then after the next small interaction where some animation and some fighting happens, we have to do it all over again. It's crazy when you notice it's happening. You ever watch that Netflix show, you know what, never mind. I'm bleeding into a video I want to make eventually about the adaptation process from page to screen. The action in these episodes do not have this trouble. When it's time to fight, they fight. Sometimes they stop to talk, but it's never just fluff time filler. They're talking about plot important beats, moving the story forward, and then they get back into it, and I call that a pretty major distinction. Sometimes it falls into the trap's internal dialogue about, I'm losing too much blood, I need to end this fast, but it's appropriate, it fits. It doesn't slow things down just for the sake of slowing it down. And it's all choreographed really cleanly as well, and choreographed might be a silly word to use there, but seriously, that's what it is. Most shots are steady and last and capture multiple quick but very clear shots being thrown, and either landing or being blocked, no bullshit, no cuts, no slow motion, real action, which I genuinely appreciate in an action cartoon. Only very rarely does it evolve into something you can't follow on the first watch. These feel like fights, not just two characters showing their moves to each other and taking turns. Can you tell I bring a lot of baggage into the animated action thing? Is it obvious yet, or blindingly obvious? The overanalyzer in my subconscious constantly asks questions during the fights about how the magic works, or couldn't they just do this or that, but 14 episodes in, I can't be too mad about it. I was basically just delighted. Edward seems to lose a lot, which I think works better than other shows I've covered, with the main character having that happen, because when Edward loses, there seems to be consequences. once, is he loses potential information or is laid up for a while, and at the end of the day, he's not this superpowered god or anything. He's a skilled young alchemist, but it's not like he's the best to ever do it, with the highest skill ceiling ever. So the couple of times Edward loses in these episodes, it doesn't make him feel weak, it makes the villains feel dangerous. And you're not gonna believe I'm actually gonna be pretentious enough to tie this into the characters of Edward and Alphonse. I like that their bonding activity is sparring with each other, or really fighting. It seems like it's serious enough that there's a winner and a loser at least, which I feel pairs really nicely with the fact that their biggest problem is losing parts of their bodies. That feeling, the physicality of a fight, is what brings them together as brothers. Yeah, I do it all, baby. We're back to Fullmetal Alchemist. If you haven't seen the first episode of my reviews for this show, the crux for this format is that I watch and then review a chunk of this show that one opening covers. We already did OP1, which covered the first 14 episodes, and now we're going to do OP2, which covers the next 12. A little behind the scenes, how the sausage is made from my thought process on that is that while often openings cover entire seasons, sometimes they don't, and this format can sometimes lead to an interesting point to stop and think while watching a show to gather my thoughts and opinions. Also, I like anime openings when they're good, so they're fun to talk about too. Reminder, I've seen this before, but my brain doesn't seem to have retained nearly any of it, so it's basically a blind watch through. Let's start with the opening this time again, because I think this opening kind of fucking rules. It sounds great. You guys think it would be worth my time to learn Japanese just so I can accurately comment on the lyrics of openings? What's the time commitment to bit quality ratio on that idea? I think it'd be pretty sugoi. Anyway, I like the song for this one better, I think. While the song for the first OP is good and all, it's probably also the weakest part of that opening for me. But without the song, the OP wouldn't even be shot like that, because yeah, I know, you're an intellectual. I'm just saying the song isn't exactly for me. This one shares a lot of similarities with it though. It starts slow and introspective before gaining momentum and exploding into our action shots, which I suppose is just the format for a lot of anime openings. This one just hits my ears better, I guess. Why don't these idiots just take the train though? Oh, it's supposed to be imagery about how their journey has started, but still the road is long and there's no end in sight. Fair enough then, good point. It of course has your anime standard quick shot of secondary and tertiary characters showing off their one thing. That guy likes eating, paralyzed guy, spoilers, likes smoking. Hawkeye likes shooting guns, and then of course you have my favorite character, Dog Haver. I'm starting to realize that in a 90-second anime opening, you don't have a lot of time, and I suppose it's not a bad use of 5 to 7 seconds. I'm starting to hate it less. What, I'm not allowed to have my own character arc? The action shots for the opening are of course great, which I have a feeling will be pretty standard for these opening. My brain kind of falls apart here though, when I think Edward throws Envy, but the impact seems to come from the side of the screen where they start, not where she was thrown to. Maybe I'm just not seeing it right. Also, small side note, does this fight during sunset at this factory location ever actually take place? Because it looks pretty sweet. I also like the fact that the theme of Edward reaching out for his mother continues, at least that's what I figure. In the start of the first one, we see him reaching out and then a shot of his mother, but in this one, he reaches towards the sky or to the heavens and thus his dead mother, which I think is very nice. And finally, the sickest shot of them all, the shot of the sunset and Edward and his dad at the cemetery. Look how fucking good this looks. I don't even really have anything to say about it other than it looks sick. And Edward looks up to the song and his dad looks to Ed with the song and then the shot changes to the beat. Oh, that's good shit. Basically, if this review turns out to be negative, yeah, I think you could have been fooled into liking this show by the opening alone. It's great. Now, on to the actual show. I always find myself thinking that these episodes feel long, and usually when people say that, that's a negative. When you're enjoying something, the time seems to fly by, and the opposite is true when you're not enjoying something. But that's not how I feel with this show. The episodes feel long and I'm enjoying it, which is a pretty cool combo. I think it stems from basically every scene holding a lot of weight in one way or another. It's either a very important scene to one of the few plot lines the show has been doing a good job of stringing together, or a scene where our characters explore where they are emotionally with themselves or with one another, or it's a very interesting action scene. I can't think of a scene in these 12 episodes that I would call filler. Everything seems important. And it's kind of crazy that a show like this can string together so many scenes over and over and stitch them together into a few different storylines and have them all keep moving and never feel stale. I was impressed with the storytelling at the start of the show, and it's only gotten stronger. The show really knows what to take its time with, the stuff that's important to our characters. And when the story feels like it's tackled where it is and handled those events with enough weight, it moves on and introduces more elements and characters. I'm very impressed with it. There was somewhere in the middle of the season where I thought, okay, we're kind of just standing around again when Ed and Al and Winry found out about Hughes's death and that whole military framing took place, but pretty much as soon as I had that thought, the show got moving again. So it only felt slow for maybe an episode, and that slowness is probably warranted. It's good that the show takes time to let characters feel and feel loudly. If it didn't, this show and the characters wouldn't be so highly regarded as it is, I'm sure. I think it was just the combination of feeling Hughes's character was a little much and a little forced, and him getting a pretty minor amount of screen time overall for this big multi-episode reaction, as well as the framing taking place around Ross, who's another character I'm not all that interested in. The plot of the framing is interesting and leads into the fact that the entire military, and therefore military government, knows about the Homunculi, and there's some screwy shit going on there, so I see the utility for sure, but I'm just saying that part dragged just a hair for me. And if that's the only negative comment I have to say about the pacing and storytelling, I gotta say, that's some glowing praise. You guys know me, I'm a huge persnickety bitch, so that's great. And I do want to comment on the slower, quieter scenes this show does so well too. It's very important, of course, for our characters to feel fleshed out and real. So when they go through hardship or loss or immense challenges, we can root for them or empathize with them. And I feel like, at least in my pinhole viewpoint of anime, and especially shonen anime, most shows don't take the time to have these smaller but all-important moments. Ed and Alphonse are obviously tragic characters, but often don't feel that way due to their attitude and bullheadedness and drive. The show explored their backstory heavily in the first 14 episodes and doesn't get bogged down with them feeling bad for themselves, but it still illustrates enough to show us why they're so driven. With that stuff being out of the way now, their emotional states are less often explored, but it's still very central to them. Ed especially, we'll come back to Alphonse in a minute. One of Edward's strongest character traits is a feeling of responsibility. He feels responsible for what happened to Alphonse. He feels responsible for getting Alphonse's and his own body back to normal. He feels responsible for protecting Winry, and now he also feels responsible for Hughes's death, since he was the one that got Hughes involved. And that takes another large toll on him. And I think the interesting part about that is that that one's much less justifiable. Hughes knew he was taking risks, and despite not knowing how dangerous things were exactly, he knew there was danger, and he was a trained and highly ranking soldier. Edward has the right to feel guilty for sure, but it's probably a little less well-founded. But a big theme of this show is dealing with loss and how people react to it, so adding a fresh loss onto that is effective in recentering the focus on those feelings. Ed not having to feel as guilty as he does, I think that might be a road they're going down with him. I mentioned last review for this show that Edward always seems to want to shoulder every burden himself, so the others around him have to do and feel less. But as I believe I said last time as well, that's a horrible way to live. You're not helping anyone by doing that, you're only hurting yourself, which once again hurts the people around you that care about you. Alphonse even starts to call him out for this behavior. He's like, fucking dude, come on, we're in this together.
I was right there with you, and I knew that there were risks. So quit trying to shoulder all of this on your own.
Edward is a character that is constantly seeking redemption, even when those around him don't feel like he needs to be redeemed, and even when the dialogue is a little cringy.
Next time I make you cry, I hope there'll be tears of joy. And Al and I will be back in our normal bodies, and I'll make you cry out of sheer happiness.
And I hope Edward does learn the lesson that leaning on people doesn't make him less of a man or less of a protector. It's so easy to have your main character be the toughest one that pushes through everything, but it's a lot more interesting, I would think, to have a character that wants to be that for the sake of the people around him and learns that it doesn't have to be that way because of the people around him. And I feel like the show has the level of writing and emotional maturity to go that way, and I hope it does. Alphonse, I'm once again a little disappointed in. The show sometimes just doesn't know what to do with him. He should certainly be the deuteragonist to Edward, but I just find myself noticing how often he's just following behind and doing what his brother does. I know their goals are very much aligned, but he should be his own character too. He's handy in a fight, I like his character and attitude, don't mind him being around at all, but his actions in the story don't seem to carry a ton of weight still. The plot is driven in large part due to him and trying to get his body back, so it's not like his presence is ever unimportant. It's just more that with how much is going on in this show, he doesn't seem to get as many moments as he should with how important of a character he is. The show even tries to throw in thoughts about his situation to give him things to worry about, like the idea that the armor will reject his soul eventually. That's basically pulled out of thin air after he sees Barry's body decaying from having a different soul in it. Yeah, but that dude is made of meat, and you are currently made of metal. And you've been like this for years. I don't know, that little plot point didn't really hit for me. It also leads into a bunch of other what seems like baseless conjecture about Ed figuring out that Al's body is still in the portal, and a few other conclusions he makes just seem to materialize from almost nowhere. And that ends up being plot important since Edward does this portal shit in a desperation play to get out of the gluttony void at the end of the season. Maybe some of it just went over my head, but their conclusion of truth still having their bodies didn't connect in my brain somewhere along the line. Anyway, it just felt like they'd noticed Alphonse didn't have much going on at the moment. He starts to have something going on his own when he has to break bread with gluttony in the closing episodes of this set, but that's right at the very end, so I can't call it a great success for him yet. I hope a big part of his arc is stepping out of his older brother's shadow. He seems to be just as skilled as Edward in their youth, and now being able to transmute without a circle, he should, in theory, be just as powerful and versatile. But still, it's Edward that leads the way on this mission. They both have the same want to complete. It's Edward who's the ranking state alchemist. It's Edward that will, it seems, end up getting the girl. I hope Alphonse grows in confidence and learns to stand beside Edward rather than a step behind him. He's had it just as rough, if not worse than his brother, but he seems to be more emotionally mature than both Ed and Winry. Maybe it's just because he physically can't cry, which is very sad now that I think about it. But he stays more level-headed than both of them in nearly every situation. He even says it himself. I think Alphonse has a lot of potential as a character, and I know we're not even halfway through the show yet, so there's still tons of time for for it to be realized. I just hope that potential doesn't get wasted. The third big character I want to talk about is Scar. But actually, before we do, I'm going to do this real quick. I'm going to be better about doing this. You guys should like the video and subscribe to my YouTube channel. It really helps, and I would appreciate it if you did. Okay, now we do the Scar thing. Scar seemed, upon a glance, to be a character that I wouldn't care for. I don't really vibe with the grumbling, badass archetype very often, but the show does a great job of showing that he has interesting views and reasonings for his actions, which elevates him just above cold murderer that needs to be overcome. I don't want to forget to put this in the script, so I'm writing it at the start of the Scar part. There's this moment in his backstory flashbacks where the Emestrians are invading his home, their glowing blue eyes contrasting the red eyes of his people. And there's this shot where it seems like an anime, lazy, time-saving effort where there's a bunch of soldiers marching and they all have the same face. But I don't think it's lazy. I think that shot is on purpose, right? Scar sees the invaders of his home and murderers of his people and family as all the same. They're just this. They're not individuals. They're just evil. This is told in his flashback. Even Winry's dad only looks slightly different than the men in that shot. I think that's very cool if that's what they were going for. Anyway, besides that, Scar's motivations are obviously somewhat understandable, which helps. And I find it interesting that he has this code and understanding with himself that he is absolutely just another person killing again because someone killed someone, because someone killed someone, because someone killed someone, and he's okay with that. He's not blind to being a part of that cycle, he just accepts it. The Emestrians drew first blood, and he feels they will face no justice unless he delivers it to them, and he's fine with killing and maiming to do it. But his prejudice is what fuels him. He's not just a maniac, he treats people from other places with respect. He bears them no ill will. He even offers to help a little girl find her lost pet because he feels a connection to her backstory. He puts the little girl dog chimera out of its misery because he pities it, not because he hated it. I don't know if there's some sort of redemption arc for him coming up, but he certainly has some traits to show that he's a hateful person, not just hate incarnate. The most interesting moment he had, for me at least, is when Winry has him at gunpoint and they both find out that he murdered her parents. I kind of wish he didn't do it in like a hazy, barely conscious, rage-filled state so it could feel more fully exactly his fault, but whatever, I guess. He tells Winry that shooting him would be justified. He took her family from her. If he chooses to murder these people in the memory of his people and his family, he sees it as completely fair for someone to do the same to him, which is super interesting. Like I said, he doesn't fucking care that he's perpetuating the cycle of violence, and naturally that means he realizes that the cycle will come back around to him eventually. Very interesting. I like that a lot for a villain. He sees alchemy as a force of evil rather than a tool or a magic. He often refers to it as a belief or a religion, asking people if this alchemy they train and follow is worth it, even when its use has resulted in horrific outcomes and atrocities being committed. He sees alchemy as a concept, as an idea, and as his enemy, which is a pretty cool thought. I'm basically just listing things I found cool about Scar at this point, I've just realized, but I'm really rather taken aback at how much the show has managed to make me find him interesting. And that's not even to mention the parallels he has with Edward and Alphonse. He lost his family, just like our lead characters, specifically his brother. He lost an arm, just like Ed. He commits all these heinous acts in the memory of his brother. He and Edward are just the same. Alchemy took from them. The only differences are that Edward and Alphonse might have a way back from it, and they did it to themselves. Scar has no way back, and some horrible monsters knocked down his borders and did it to him. Edward and Scar share a lot of similarities, though the show hasn't commented on them much yet. Once again, it's another element I hope the show goes into. The story, once again, I have to mention, only covering 12 episodes here, is capturing me more, I think. I'm glad there's more of a political slant than I imagine. It helps keep the episodes fresh when compared to other shows I've seen where it's just action and funny haha anime humor and then they just loop that. And the political stuff doesn't seem performative at all. Cough. Solo leveling. Cough. They do a good job of exploring each plotline without forgetting about the others. A big part of this batch of episodes was the military plotline, where we slowly learn more and more about it until we find that, surprise, is actually a plot tied into the homunculus plotline. Like, of course we knew that a little bit, but we didn't know just how much. And it sort of impressed me that the crew finding out about Bradley's homunculus hood comes in a conversation where they just deduce it. It seems like that would be a big holy shit reveal for the main cast, but it plays with your expectations and has them figure it out on their own because they're smart. Very nice. Also, I find myself wondering, with the revelation about what happened to Xerxes and the homunculi's hand in it, do we know yet why Amestria invaded Ishval? It may have been said at some point, but if it was, I forgot. And even then, if they did say it, with all the new information we have, it probably wasn't the truth. So what I'm saying is, since we know the government is willingly run by the homunculi, and we know the homunculi sacrificed all of Xerxes, were the homunculi trying to do the same with Ishval? I'm not sure. I like this format because I get to think more deeply about the show at stopping points, think about where the characters and stories are going. Like Ling and Mei Chang have been around for 12 episodes now, and while I know not every episode episode, but their stuff hasn't really gone anywhere as of yet. They'll clearly have something to do with each other, both being from Xing and both mentioning the caste order in that country and how they come from very different lives. But so far, they've been largely ornamental. I like Ling, once again, more than I thought I would. From how he comes in, he just seems like a goofball, but he's not too goofy, and often his serious side wins out. So he's much more palatable than, say, a Hughes for me. He's confident and good in a fight and has a good sense of humor, as well as being a good enough guy to not abandon his subordinates. I think somehow he may still be a villain, though, since every time he says he wants to be immortal, he says it in this crazy, sinister, evil voice. Mei Chang's voice is appropriate, and her voice actress does a good job of not delivering lines annoyingly, even though the voice is just kind of annoying on its own. I don't know. I don't have much to say about Mei Chang yet, despite being introduced early on in this batch of episodes. We don't see her again for I feel like 9 or 10 of them. I just pray the joke about her hearing about Edward actually plays out, that she will just be disappointed that he is not how she pictures him, and that will just be the one-off joke. I hope it's not a running gag where she has this weird obsessive crush on him. That would suck. On the topic of humor, maybe I was just in a good mood while watching this, but I think it's a lot better. Sometimes the show actually tries to tell a joke, like with timing and a punchline and everything. It's pretty refreshing in the face of the comedy at the start of the show. Even Avatar needed about 14 episodes before its comedy found its footing, so it's not at all impossible. Even the jokes where the characters just go, whoa, are set up and timed better, I think. But it can still invade and throw off what are otherwise serious scenes, and that can be annoying. Before we get back into the plot, where I want to talk about the homunculi, I should mention the action again. I think it's a little less impressive this time around for sure. The fights still play out the way I desperately want anime fights to play out. Short and sweet is much better than long and riddled with flashbacks to first grade. And while the fights are still animated very well, I find them to be a little less creative. Now, I know we can't have every fight eat up the entire power bill for all of Japan every time the plot demands a little scuffle, and besides, lower key fights help highlight the really awesome, great big ones. But some elements to these fights feel a little less polished to me. The choreography is less impressive, and there are a lot of shots of character doing a close action, cut to a wide shot of that action, rather than just showing the full action, which is a shortcut a lot of shows take, and honestly, it's a fine creative choice once in a while. I just noticed it a lot more when what I loved about the action for this show was how fluid and creative it could be. That's not to say there's no really cool animation. That shit where Mustang fries lust, wow, that looks great and sounds great. Great moment. I'm honestly surprised the show killed her so early. She seems like the kind of character that would stick around and be the annoying smug villain the whole time. So props for catching me off guard and nuking her ass. Honestly, if I'm being really fair to the show, those criticisms kind of go out the window as the season goes on. It gets better, so maybe it was just a few episodes that didn't work for me. The world once again feels like it's not taking advantage of the magic system to me though. When Mustang was like, haha, we can turn that water she just dropped on us into an explosive, I was like, oh shit, true bestie. But surely that means you could be way more creative in nearly every situation if you can do that. I've also noticed the animation in the slower or quieter moments really holding on single frames, which isn't a sin or anything. Every show does that. Just once again, I'm just noticing it more. Like, hello? Oh, there we go. And at the end of the day, this is really just a random grab of 12 episodes from a 60-plus episode run of a show. The show has instilled enough goodwill in me that I suspect the action will pick up again greatly. Now, onto the homunculus plot. First of all, I really like that each one of them seems to have a super form, really opens up what they can seem to do. I guess I already saw that with Greed last season, but it didn't really dawn on me that that's what I was seeing. And it does leave me wondering what Lust's super form would have been, unless it was just the big spiky fingers. Also, the Hoenheim stuff is 1 part confusing, 2 parts intriguing, probably. Him just showing up briefly seemed out of nowhere, but I'm sure it was important. I'm also not convinced that the person the homunculi call Father and Hoenheim are the same guy. Like, Father might be yet another homunculus based on him or something. I'm not sure. I just get the vibe that there are 2 dudes that look exactly like this in the story, and it's trying to trick me, but I'm simply too intelligent. Right? Surely I'm right. But there is another theory forming in my head that if I'm wrong and the real Hoenheim is in fact Father, like it is the same guy and he does turn out to be a homunculus still, that would make Ed and Alphonse the offspring of a homunculus, which tie them in tighter to that whole plot line. The 7 deadly sins would be their family in a way. I know it said somewhere in season 1 homunculi can't have kids, but whatever, we're learning new shit all the time in the show. I doubt everything they tell us is strictly true. I did have the question, if Brad is king and a fake person, where did he come from? How did he become king if he had no backstory, no childhood? But that was answered by the fact that the government knows that he's a homunculi, and he also had a childhood on top of that. Apparently you could become a homunculus while you were human beforehand. So maybe Hoenheim has that sort of deal going on? Granny does say he looks the exact same, and I don't think homunculi age. I don't know, there's a lot of interesting shit going on with him. Also, Brad has a voice in his head that he calls Pride, and Pride has the exact same voice as his adopted son. So I am very prepared for that bomb to drop. Also, that paper sucked. What was even the thesis? My dad rules? Yeah, no shit, kid. He's king, stupid kid. They keep mentioning a portal to the truth realm and a sacrifice they need for it, and from what I can gather, that sacrifice has to be an alchemist. They haven't said that outright yet, but just trying to use my brain over here. And with gluttony being a failed portal to truth, is Hoenheim like a failed sacrifice maybe? I don't know. There are many plot points all spiraling around each other and they just haven't connected yet. It's all very interesting. I hope it all comes together. Also on the topic of my dumbass theories, haha, I was right. It was Alphonse in that body. And I don't lose any points for having technically seen this and not remembering. That counts as a full-on correct theory according to me. It also ties into the one emotional through line I don't really follow from the show right now. So the boys have been of the opinion that human transmutation is impossible to do correctly, right? So then they find out that the thing they brought back wasn't their mom, and then Ed is all sad about it. Maybe I'm an idiot, but why are you sad about it? You know whatever you created was a monstrosity, and you have concluded that the process is impossible, so why are you sad that you didn't bring back your mom to exist for another few brutal moments of agony? Shouldn't that be a good thing that it wasn't your mom? Teacher seems to think so. She's glad she didn't put her child through that pain, and I'm on her side. I guess I just missed something? Like, why is Edward sad there? But that's the only big hiccup the show had for me in its storytelling, other than the weird conclusions Ed came to about Al's body still being trapped. And I honestly err more on the side of me not understanding than the show not doing a good enough job explaining, but now I have a new baseless theory. When Edward was in the truth zone, he saw Al's body, but that's just his body, and he was able to talk and recognize Edward. In my mind, he should just be a husk with no soul, no recognition or emotion, which sort of opens up the idea that whatever is in the suit of armor isn't Alphonse again, even though the show seems to tell us over and over that it is. Which is why my new theory is that there are two Alphonses now, both fully legitimately actually Alphonse. Is that like a full order of magnitude dumber than any of my other theories? I think it might be. I was impressed with the first 14 episodes of this show. Having watched those ones before I made a video on it, like way back years ago, I was surprised with how much I did end up thinking it was quite good. With these ones, I remember even less, which I'm enjoying a lot. I remember Envy turning into a big green monster, but that was honestly about it. I think the show is executing basically everything very well. The story's great, characters, even characters that seemed bland before, are growing or showing sides of themselves that went unseen before. And every new development adds interesting angles and folds to the story that, while expanding the world, most don't feel disconnected from the events happening that we care about. These 12 episodes were very strong. I'm enjoying it a lot, and we'll come back to see the next bunch soon. What is up with it? We are back to Fullmetal Alchemist. You know the drill at this point. We're talking about the episodes that opening 3 covers. I've realized something though in the creation process. I should probably start laying out where this set of episode begins and ends, since that's pretty hard to parse by just the openings. So this set of episodes actually starts with a weird clip show episode of Hohenheim sitting next to a fire, but that one only sort of counts. Where it actually starts is this crazy episode where Tobias meet Father. And it ends with the episode where we find out who Pride really is. We're talking about those moments and everything in between. As we've made for the standard with Fullmetal Alchemist, let's start with the opening. I think this one's I don't like this one as much. Though it did grow on me as time went on, I just think it has a lot less starkly memorable moments. The song also isn't as striking. That being said though, even though the visuals aren't as sweet as the last couple, holy, remember that sunset shot? There is still a lot to think about. We once more join Edward as he reaches towards the sky. I still think it represents reaching towards his mother, but with how this season progresses, maybe it could just be more interpreted that Ed is reaching out towards his goals in general. I like that the first half of the opening almost poses the Emestrians as the villains. Well, we know they are in fact the villains on multiple levels, the Homunculi and this weird cringe lord that we'll get into. But it even frames past Mustang in that same way, which is interesting. Mustang, we learned this season, is horrified with the actions of the military in Ishval, and by extension, he's horrified by his own actions. Mustang of the past is a villain to the current Mustang. This idea is sort of replayed in the second half of the opening, as General Armstrong is shown with her military might. But the question that is posed is, despite being on side, is that a good thing? It wasn't in the past. And being on side in this show now kind of has a different context. The rest of the OP plays out in pretty standard fashion. Introduce your new side characters with some brief blink and you miss it really important moments. The part that sticks out to me the most, maybe just because we haven't gotten any answers or even information hinting toward it yet, are these brief moments with Alphonse. We see him dodging the truth hands in this void, but then we immediately see he's being held up by the seemingly good versions of the same hands. I don't know if this is just a cool visual for the opening or what, since I didn't catch literally anything in this set of episodes that the visual could be referencing. Maybe that implies there's an opposite force to truth that's acting. Well, it's not that truth's actually acting, it's just like a thing in a place somewhere. And what would that opposite force even be called? Lies? The hands do seem to be holding Alphonse up rather than dragging him down, so it seems like they would be benevolent. Hope to find out more about this in the future. The last thing in the opening that caught my eye was Edward with his flower. At the start of the opening, we see him smash it as he stands to face his enemies, but we replay that scene right at the very end, and Ed has a moment of realization before stopping his hand. I wasn't sure what the show was getting getting at in the early season, but now having watched the whole thing, maybe I have something. I'll try not to be too much of a pretentious idiot about it, but how this reads to me is that when given the chance or choice to preserve life, Ed will. In the last episode of this set, Edward is given 3 tasks, one of which is sacrificing a large group of people, which he agrees to. But both Alphonse and I think that is a very obvious lie. Edward first smashes the flower, maybe accidentally, unknowingly, much like how he was unknowingly working for the bad guys as the show started. But now, with realization, he will not bend to their command. And he knows he holds a lot of people's lives in his hands, not just from Briggs, but with the revelation about the massive circle, the entire country. It's funny, this OP might be the most interesting from a visual standpoint and making me think about the show, but it's also certainly my least favorite of the 3 so far. Alright, we gotta get the Ember Island players out of the way first when talking about this season. The first episode is a weird clip show, which I'm not sure if that's the standard for anime or not, but it definitely caught me by surprise. It was a handful of episodes before the halfway mark of the entire show, and I would think if you're gonna do that, you'd do it then. It kind of pissed me off because it referenced High School Musical 2 at me.
Hey! Dance with me!
I don't dance.
I don't dance. I know you can. Not a chance. No.
You know how many times I've seen that movie? I've seen that movie maybe 50 times. Now, thankfully, it wasn't just a clip show or High School Musical references or women unintentionally snapping their own necks. There were interesting beats for Hohenheim as well. The thing is I don't know what any of it means, I don't think. I think the show is trying to trick me into thinking that there aren't 2 Hohenheims because there are visuals of 2 Hohenheims in this episode that are a dream or all in his head or whatever. There's normal, mild-mannered Hohenheim, and then there's this more aggressive and pessimistic Hohenheim that's present in the psyche. Which, oh, now hold on now, I just thought of this as I'm voicing this. I didn't write this in the script, so stay with me here. So Ling is still present in his body, even though he gave his body up to the greed entity, whatever the hell that is, right? So right now I'm thinking Hohenheim's dynamic of that may be flipped around the other way. Like the awful pessimistic version of Hohenheim that he sees in his psyche is the actual Hohenheim. And the demon or entity that he gave up his body to is the actual pretty normal dude seeming Hohenheim. Because later in this set of episodes, Hohenheim laments how he wants to live a human life, but feels powerless to, and I'm not sure why yet. They haven't really gone into his whole thing in depth yet, but it's made clear that Hohenheim definitely isn't a normal human. Okay, back to the script, where we're talking about my 2 Hohenheim theory. Angry Hohenheim doesn't really match up with what we see from Father in the first actual episode. Father is undoubtedly a bad guy, but he's also seemingly very calm and measured. He almost lacks the emotions of the other homunculi, meaning Hohenheim doesn't share this demeanor. And from what we knew about Hohenheim before the season, I could have been fooled into thinking that just base normal Hohenheim did have that attitude. But with the little bits of info we have been getting about him here and there, it is revealed that he does have wants and feels human. It's easy to conclude that Father and Hohenheim are the same dude at this point, and through this season I did relent and think that a couple times. But even with this perhaps multiple personalities reveal opening the door to Hohenheim and Father being the same guy, I can't shake the feeling that there are 2 separate dudes that just physically look like this. And maybe I'm wrong and I'll look back at these videos and think, wow, I just spent a ton of time in these videos just talking in circles, speculating about absolutely nothing. But I don't know, I'm having fun thinking about it. The show is doing a really good job of throwing a wrench in that thinking and then taking that wrench out and then replacing it with another weirder shaped wrench. I find myself thinking the show has cheated me. It's making me seem like an obsessive maniac theorizing about there being 2 dudes that look the exact same, but what the hell am I supposed to do? We're halfway through the show and we have only had brief fleeting moments with each of the characters, and those moments pose more questions than they answer. Hohenheim opening up to himself, or maybe Trisha in these flashbacks, talking about how he wants to live a human life and love and die with his family, of course makes you think that he is this other asshole, who is clearly not a human as well, but he also seems incapable of having these wants, so at the same time it heavily implies that they're not the same guy. Oh, my head hurts. I'm still of the opinion that there are 2 separate guys that look like this, and I will be disappointed if that's not the case. Probably not disappointed in the show though, more disappointed that I'd be wrong. Okay, so on to actually talking about the show. This season's a weird one, and I realize that the term season is a misnomer. I don't actually know the release schedule for this show, but I doubt there were breaks based on opening alone. So when I say season, I know that I'm actually just talking about a random chunk of episodes in a 60 episode show. I got it, but I'm just saying season, so keep up. So this season is an odd one. We start at basically the climax of the storyline from last season. Debais meet Father, Ed, Ling, and Envy all find their way out of the gluttony void, and we get a bunch of utterly confusing reveals that desperately need answering. For some reason, there's an entity tied to the Philosopher's Stone that sort of lives inside of it. Like when Ling accepts the Philosopher's Stone, he speaks to something, a demon or a god or something. Some entity that is just the embodiment of greed, I guess. And Edward's confused.
So then, are you the greed from before?
Then Alphonse is confused.
So, You're not Ling?
Then I'm confused, like what the fuck, and Greg Davies is confused.
What the fuck's going on?
So the homunculi are only able to exist because they accepted some sort of entity into their being, or I guess are strong enough to have it forced upon them and live. Or I think a body can just be made for the entity and they can inhabit it if they want. For some reason, Edward and Alphonse's alchemy doesn't work around Father. That one seems to be at least slightly answered as the season went on, though. Mei Chang explains to Dr. Sidious that alchemy uses chi. Makes perfect sense. But then Doc explains some poppycock about taking energy from the movement of the earth, and both Mei Chang and I are like, huh? That ain't right. So it seems like the magic system directly is also somehow tied to some messed up stuff going on with Father and the Funky Bunch. But for some reason, it's only the version of alchemy that Amestrians use. Like, Scar can still use his no problem. That being said, Father doesn't even seem to be aware why Scar's alchemy isn't intrinsically tied to whatever he's doing to stop them from using it. Father seems to be surprised and confused that Scar can still use his alchemy around him, which means that not even Father seems to be fully informed on every little detail and interaction of the whole overarching power system and story. You guys ever watch Lost? Don't worry, no spoilers. You know how it just kept adding more and more questions onto the mystery, and then there were other mysteries, and it just kept piling up, and then you got halfway through season 3 and you just said, fuck it. This is just getting frustrating that there are never any answers, and not even Evangeline Lilly is enough of a pull to keep you around. You know how that happens? Happens all the time. Well, this show certainly won't be as bad as Lost, I'm sure, but it is reminding me a bit of that feeling. Things keep getting more interesting. New mind-bending elements keep getting added. Unlike Lost, the show has a strong reputation though, and I've never heard once that it has an unsatisfying ending or things get brought up and go unanswered, so I'm fully prepared and sort of expecting for all this really interesting shit to get paid off in very interesting ways. And I guess that's what the full end review will be of this show. I like the show a lot right now. It's all very interesting. I like the characters a lot, but if the show somehow finds a way to make all this lame or stupid, that'll probably end up souring my opinion on the whole thing. But I guess that's also just how most people are with shows. I usually take large portions of these videos to talk about where we're at character-wise and what I think, but honestly, with this set of episodes, things are largely plot-driven. It seems like the show has split itself into two halves, at least from where I'm sitting right now. We had our first half that has set up everything we currently know, and finally came to a head with the giant meeting with Father and all the homunculi that the main cast narrowly escaped, and now we're setting up the second half, where we really get into what the hell is going on behind the scenes and setting up new characters that will be important as we move into the back half. So with these episodes, it's a lot of characters moving around. It's wondering where they're going to go next, explaining why they're going to go there, trying to not reveal why they're going there, wondering why they're going there, and trying to track them as they're going there. So there's a lot less room for character for our main cast, as they mostly just try to deal with the new revelations of the previous few massive episodes while they set up a new setting and new challenges, which I won't praise, but I also don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I did find that there were some scenes that seemed to drag on a bit. Some scenes where Alphonse and Edward just speak to each other and largely just retread what we and what they already know, which isn't odd for this show actually, but there were a few more than I would like, or they lasted a bit longer than I'd like. Like the scene where, whoops, they're accidentally at Brad's house because they ran into Salim, which I'm not entirely sure why that scene is there. We already know the buys are under Brad's thumb. They can't say anything. They already know his secret, and this is before the Pride reveal, so even though I already called Salim being Pride, without that context of the scene, for your average viewer, what is this scene really here for? We don't learn anything new, and it takes up a pretty decent chunk of the episode as well. Those kind of scenes seem to be more prevalent in these episodes. The only really new information we can glean is that Brad's wife isn't in on it, because if she were, they wouldn't have to be talking in this good-natured small talk code that the scene plays out in. After the fact, many episodes later, when we learn that Salim is Pride, we can also think back and be like, okay, not only does Brad's wife not know he's a homunculus, but she's probably unaware her adopted son is too, because if she was in on it, they could just drop the pretense in this scene and speak plainly to each other. But yeah, with the show being so story-focused for this batch, Ed and Alphonse don't really seem to go in any interesting directions character-wise right now, which I'm not in love with, because I really do like these two characters a lot, and I like when they're challenged in interesting ways and I get to see their strengths. The only really interesting new challenge they have to face is be quiet about all the top secret homunculus run the government stuff, and if you don't, we have your friend Winry as an unknowing hostage, which basically equates to them just having to be quiet a lot of the time, which isn't very interesting. I guess there's also the revelation that Ed and Winry have both confirmed in their own minds that they like each other, which is something to do with character, but it doesn't add up to anything more than Edward acting goofy for a minute or two here and there. You know, now that both of these characters seem to have the exact same level of agency in the story, I think I've come to the conclusion that I actually like Alphonse better. I probably would have said the opposite if you asked me while I was writing either of the last two videos, but I think that could have just been due to the fact that there was more to think about with Edward. But now now that it's so story heavy, I think Alphonse wins it out. He's funny and responsible and thoughtful and capable. I don't know, I just fuck with this dude. And a lot of it is due to his English voice actor being so great. I know there's a lot of praise for Edward's voice actor. He's seen as iconic, and I think he does do a very good job. But why isn't there more love for Alphonse's VA? He hits some really nice inflections on lines.
Speak up.
My hair! It looks awful.
He can really sell me on them, and it's harder because there's no facial animation to the performance at all. I think this dude's killing it, despite nothing really interesting going on with him at the moment. Some interesting things happen with the other characters, though, thankfully. I like the revelation that Mustang wants to become the next Fuhrer and then try everyone who took part in the Ishvalan genocide as a war criminal, including himself, even though the crimes committed there were only his second worst crime. The most dastardly of all, of course, is when he called Doghaver a simple pawn. It sets up a really interesting theme that these episodes explore of how far do your beliefs take you and if you really believe in them. Remember how I mentioned Edward not wanting to crush that flower in the opening? So the basis is this. Mustang realizes that what took place in Ishval, the things that were done to those people, were unjust. And his part in it, despite following the orders of an organization he knows now has strange, unknowable, scary motives, seemingly straight up evil motives, he knows that it was his hands that did it. He is responsible, and so is everyone that took part in the massacres. Mustang holds true to these morals, even at the probable cost of his own life, since I imagine war crimes carry the penalty of death in this world, and if not, certainly life in prison. Another example is General Armstrong. She's pretty one note when we meet her. She's this really angry, scary lady that respects strength and ability above all else. She sees what she sees and makes no excuses for anyone or anything. If someone is strong, they can gain her respect. This is what we learn is the center mindset of her character. This is what matters most to her. But it's challenged when she learns of the big circle plan, and Raven shows up and offers her a legion of unkillable soldiers, a position among the inner circle, and immortality for herself. What is that offer if not an offer of more strength? She refuses it though and kills Raven. What does this mean for this character? We don't know her very well yet, but it seems she values strength above all else. But when the idea of sacrificing thousands upon thousands of people to achieve that strength is brought up, probably people she would see as weak, that crosses the line. In fact, doing so, achieving power in that way, makes the villains and Raven weak in their own way in her eyes. Her mindset cannot be pushed that far, no matter the positives for her. Everyone has a different tipping point for what they believe in dearly, and it seems that for Armstrong, even if you're someone she doesn't know or respect, a nameless weakling on the other side of the country, she will not stand for you being killed for no other reason so that strength can win out in the end. These episodes explore these tipping points for characters, though it is pretty low-key. Kimley, our new villain, is the opposite side of the coin to both Mustang and Armstrong. He was in the Ishval conflict and sees no problem with it because his philosophy is much the same as Armstrong. The world should reward whoever wins, and the people that win are the strongest. He doesn't have the same morals as Armstrong, though. That tipping point on this issue probably doesn't even exist for him. The government and the Homunculi are probably going to win this conflict, whatever the hell it ends up being. So being on side with them and showing his ability and strength while aligned with them is the only reasonable move. Why align with weakness when all being weak does is get you subjugated or killed? What is it to him if a couple 100,000 or millions need to die? And because of this mindset, he disagrees with Mustang as well. Mustang calls what happened at Ishval a series of atrocities committed willingly by a corrupt country and ruling class carried out by willing soldiers. Whether or not they took pleasure in it is beside the point. Kimley calls what happened at Ishval the natural way of the world. These tipping points seem to be where the show differentiates its villains from its protagonists, morally. That's why it's an interesting beat when Edward does agree to commit a large-scale sacrifice involving everyone in Briggs. We know Edward's character, and we know he wouldn't do that. His breaking point on that matter was established long ago. He refuses to use a Philosopher's Stone that was made using human sacrifice, even if he wasn't involved. So the idea of him willingly taking part in the process of the sacrifice is completely out of the question, and that's why as you're watching it, you know he's lying to Kimley, even without there having to be a wink at the camera or Alphonse confirming it to you later. And I'd say that's a good example of strong character writing. Scar was on the fast track of being the most interesting character in the show, but unfortunately he really takes a back seat in this stretch of episodes. He's barely in it, which sucks, but he is also in my mind when I think about these tipping point questions for characters. I'd still definitely call him a villain, even with the new context of the military government being way more evil than him, because he didn't know all this stuff before he started murdering state alchemists indiscriminately. He wants to kill them and the leaders of Mestri, I imagine, for revenge, not to prevent any evil being done or something. But that being said, he's a different level of villain than than Kimberly. Kimberly actively wants to aid the greatest evil of all and gain from it. Scar is just on a one-man mission of revenge, and thus Scar has a different moral boundary. Scar doesn't see people from other races or places as worth sacrificing or killing. He just wants to murder all the state alchemists and probably the heads of state too. That's all. Is that too much to ask? He's a bad guy, but he's a bad guy in a different, much more interesting way. Because I find, and I don't like using the word, I think it's a modern cheat code for the English language, but I find Kimberly to be kinda cringe. He's got this lame villain voice and he just seems to want to do evil for the sake of being stronger and being mean and bad. It almost feels like a character like him doesn't really fit in this show. I guess the utility of having him is that you can actually have an actual acting villain in this storyline, because Scar is off doing his own thing at the moment and he's too interesting of a character and he has too much going on to be the antagonist at this moment. And the story is literally the homunculi will let Debais continue with their goal of restoring their bodies as long as they don't try and drop dime on them to the entire country about how the place is run by monsters. So you need something to be on their ass, something to push the matter, add some urgency to the plot. I get it, I just don't think Kimberly is all that interesting of a foil based on what I've seen from him so far. And because he's so basic, I honestly don't expect him to live very long. I prefer the complexity of Scar or the mystery of the homunculi rather than the blunt, cackling laughter of cliche villain Kimberly. And this thought process of where characters finally bend brings us all the way back around to the homunculi. The homunculi aren't human in more ways than just being actually not human. They do not have this moral point of second-guessing themselves, just like Kimberly, and that's probably why Kimberly doesn't feel interesting to me, because he doesn't have the mystery of the homunculi under him to prop himself up. The homunculi are interestingly evil because I don't feel like I even know half of the story with them, but they are a simple evil as well. There's no nuance to them that I can really see at the moment. Humans are weak and unintelligent. God is a construct created by the weak and unintelligent man. They see themselves as the only ones with complexity, but I'm not sure what that complexity is yet. We get a new one this season with Sloth, and he, paradoxically to what I just said about with how the homunculi think of themselves, much like Kimberly, is the least interesting of them all. At least Gluttony has this weird innocent personality to him. Sloth is just a lumbering idiot who thinks everything is a pain. He's not much of a character. Props though for making Sloth a 10-foot, 700-pound mountain of pure muscle. Wouldn't think that based off the name. I think with him we round out the 7 deadly sins naming convention, so I don't expect to see any new homunculi really. Well, them and the Hoenheim father deal, whatever that shakes out to be. Side note, I really do like this whole thing where greed isn't just a homunculus. The idea of greed is also this weird demon god entity that actually lives, I don't know, inside the Philosopher's Stone maybe? But this is a new Philosopher's Stone that infects Ling, isn't it? But it seems like this greed demon is used to people resisting him. So it's clear the homunculi bodies are just hosts for something greater that is present somewhere else. I don't know. Side note, I fucking knew that Ling would be a villain. I didn't exactly expect it to go like this, but I was right. That counts for sure. And with the Sloth digging the tunnel thing out of the way, I think the rest of my watch through will be truly, totally blind. Like, I scarcely remembered anything watching this through again as I do these videos about the show, only elements here and there. But now, after this, I got nothing, no idea at all going forward, which is exciting. I was gonna bring something up. Right, the homunculus and how they tie into this whole idea. So the homunculi seem very goal-oriented and single-minded. They want to complete their goal of whatever the hell it is because they see themselves as above human, much like humans see themselves as above insects. It's as natural as that. And because of this, it seems they are not beholden to your average human moral compass. Their evil feels different from Kimberly's. While they may take pleasure or pride in what they're doing, it almost feels like their nature to do this. Their feelings of superiority drive them to fulfill this plan of sacrificing the entire country to make a philosopher's boulder, I guess. For what reason, I do not know. But it surely has something to do with the truth zone, since gluttony is a failed portal to that place, and also pride seems to use the exact same hands that truth does. So what the hell does that mean? I also thought that when Pride first showed up to kill those guys, that maybe it was a new lust in the way that there's a new greed, and maybe this was her super form, because they all get skewered and she the pointy fingers. Anyway, Father can transmute on a whole other level. No equivalent exchange, no nothing, no circle, no hands clapping. He's basically a god from what I can tell. Father seems completely removed from Hohenheim in that he almost seems like he's socially inexperienced, which is an interesting turn for him. Man, there's a lot to this show, and it does a really good job of exploring all sides of ideas it brings up. Like with the different aspects and reactions to the Ishvalan War, we see different retellings and viewpoints from different people. And we see this human, Ling, who willingly gave himself and his free will over to this entity to become inhuman. And then we have Hohenheim, who, despite all of my speculation, could just be a body that was made out of thin air. Perhaps just being meat for one of those entities to inhabit, wanting to live and die a human life. In his dream, he watches humans live a human life, and he feels removed from them, like he can't join in. No stone goes unturned, and it gets turned multiple ways, and I really appreciate that. Oh, by the way, do you know how annoyed I was with myself when they were like, yeah, the entire country is being set up as an alchemy circle? I was like, fuck, man, I should have thought that. I remember thinking about why the country would be a circle, but I never thought past that, and my only thought on it was, that's a stupid shape for a country. I realized as I finish up this script that this video is going to feel a bit different than the other two videos talking about Fullmetal Alchemist because of the kinds of episodes this video is covering. It's a lot of question posing and moving pieces around, and while I do think it's good, it has certainly been a season that didn't capture a lot of my favorite elements of this show. I like the mysteries, and I actually really like that the good guys and the bad guys are both sort of working for the same organization. That's an interesting angle. And I like when our characters get to bounce off of each other and meet new people, but it lacked the energy and emotion I've learned that this show can pull off so well. I didn't even talk about any action in this video because honestly, there isn't much action at all. There's a scene where Scar and Kimberly largely posture each other, and then Scar throws a javelin through Kimberly and he runs away, and then there's the sloth conflict where it's mostly just shooting tank slugs at him. And across these entire 12 episodes, that's it. Surprising, right? Also, a joint flying kick from both Edward and Alphonse is tantamount to the power of a tank round. Put that in your power scaling notes. I know where we are in the story. I know you need to set new things up after having that big conflict with Father, but I think I'm just in a bit of a frustrated spot in the show where there's so much potentially sick stuff happening, and I don't have the answers, and I want the answers, and the show is taking its time just a touch too much for me. It's like I'm a kid and it's a week before Christmas. I'm just like, fucking come on already, give it to me! Which, though I'm whining about it in this closing paragraph, it definitely has to be a ringing endorsement for the show. I want the show to reveal these things to me, the inner workings of the story that I'm really trying to piece together, but I just can't yet, which means I'm involved and invested, and that means the show has to be doing a lot right. Welcome to what I have rapidly discovered is the second to last video covering Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. That episode count really sneaks up on you. This run goes all the way from when they do the Winry kidnapping play in Briggs with Scar right up to episode 50 where the army of immortal soldiers is awakened. A lot of shit goes down, a lot of which I like, and a chunk of which I got kind of annoyed with. Let's get into it. Talking about the openings to start off Fullmetal Alchemist videos is like an old hat at this point. The warm, fuzzy blanket of liking them well enough, but only really loving opening 2 and being worried that you're somehow insulting some culturally significant 90 seconds of animation and music that will get you nuked from orbit. Does Japan have nukes? I don't think it matters. Anime fans have nukes. I know this for a fact. Oh, by the way, I think I figured out why I don't like the opening 3 song as much. Does it not sound like it's gonna break into Japanese 75% speed, bombs over Baghdad, but just never gets there? Okay, on to OP4. I thought for a second there was no thematic continuation of Edward reaching out for his mother or towards the heavens, but no, it's here. Edward starts to reach upward here, as he so often does in these openings, and not only that, he reaches towards the center of what I believe is the human transmutation circle. And what does that mean? That's right, he's reaching towards his mother. The trend continues. I'm so right. Okay, so I like the song better, but probably only for the first little bit, the first 3 guitar strings. Those feel like some childhood permanent synapse forming frames and notes. After that though, when the song really gets going, it's just pretty alright. Those first notes really get me primed for some good shit, and then it just turns out to be a pretty good song, I guess. Not in love with it like opening 2, not unmoved by it like opening 3. Opening 1 probably outranks it though. There's a ton of symbology that is lost on me though, but it's definitely present, which makes me think I'm just still not getting a lot of shit, which is a running theme in this show I've discovered, which I'll bring up later. The alchemy version of the big circle is obviously insanely important, and I assume having this imagery come up again in this set of episodes of this seal or whatever it is, that's gonna end up being more important than it's been led on to be. Visually, I don't think this one's very striking. There's a lot of red and blue going on. The blue usually, I feel, represents Debais as they're in front of the evil backgrounds and their shadows are blue, and all of the evil, bad, no good stuff in the show is usually red, being tied to Father and the Philosopher's Stones. So it's interesting that Edward is pictured in red in contrast to Alphonse's blue here. I know there is a classic anime reveal that means Edward is more tied to the bad guys than previously thought, so him being in red might make sense, but Alphonse is also tied to them in that same way, so I'm not sure. My biggest gripe with this one is that a lot of the action shots can feel hard to follow, a lot of crazy smear frames and up-close shots and lighting. I feel like it can look kind of messy. The frames I can see look really cool and great, but yeah, compared to the action from the other openings, come on. I also like the idea of capturing the whole extended cast in these shots, as that is rapidly becoming more and more of an issue, that we have loved ones around, and surprisingly a lot of them come back this season. But I also feel like these shots that actually do have more meaning this time get muddled in with these other generic anime opening ones of our main characters looking sad/determined. Overall, not a bad opening for me, not a great one either though. These were some critical episodes for the show. Let's start with Hoenheim, who continues to be the axis around the entire show's show seems to swing. First of all, of course, you've been waiting for this. I knew it. There are two guys that look exactly like this. Honestly, I'm impressed with the commenters, with how much I was speculating on that, and no one spoiled that specifically, though you guys are pretty loose-lipped with referring to some other stuff. Oh well, none of it's in the future now, so I'm still totally blind at this point. Hohenheim's backstory is one of the most interesting episodes of the show. It finally answers a ton of the questions that I had pretty neatly, honestly, and poses another giant one. All the homunculi stuff, Father, why the homunculi are actually weird demons, that's all answered. But a new, even bigger question that persists now is, what the hell is Father? Like, in the first place, he's just this weird entity in a bottle to start before making himself a body. So, like, what the hell is it? If it's not a homunculus at this point, it's something before that whole system came into play, what is it? Whatever it is, it's clearly devious, a trickster, as it fools the ruling class of Xerxes and is spiritually nuking the whole country. And it has the capacity to feel human emotion, and that's what all the deadly sin homunculi are, all of its negative traits splintered off. So this thing, in its entirety, is strikingly human, despite being a floating, smiling black orb. And it's also clearly very informed about how the world works, because it made the king of Xerxes sacrifice the entire country to both give itself a body, and I imagine that's where the original Philosopher's Stones came from too. Meaning that this thing knew about truth, how to access its realm, and knew the rules truth plays by, and took advantage of them, which means it operates on a knowledge level far above anyone else in the show. Now, it may seem strange to say, but this show is pretty grounded, at least in its own logic. The magic, despite being magic, is anchored soundly to a logic. Things don't just happen for no reason. There aren't strictly magical creatures or unexplained happenings just because, which means the origins of this thing has to make sense on some level. It has to be something or someone that works within the rules of the world. With all that being said, I have no fucking idea what this thing could be. Usually I'm aware enough to little hints in the show to at least be able to form ideas about the grander mysteries, but with this thing, I got no idea, man. I guess I'm not totally against it just being a weird, scary, unexplainable thing, maybe. Like, we have truth, and we really don't know what that thing is. It's just a thing that exists, probably logically, somehow, but the characters don't have the logic available to them to explain it. But it's an entity that seems to exist within the magic system itself, and there are rules and a way to visit it. It fits within the rules of the show. But Father, where we sit right now, is so far removed from any detail, he borders on an unknown unknown, which are things that we don't know that we don't know.
What I'm saying is that there are known knowns and that there are known unknowns, but there's also unknown unknowns. Things we don't know that we don't know.
Like, if he wasn't here doing stuff in the show, but he still existed outside of the plot of the show, there would be no logical reason to believe such a thing even exists. But it does. Here it is, existing. I'm the kind of guy that loves the idea of unexplainable shit being too small in this vast universe to grasp all of it. But in a show like this, I don't think Father and what the demon in the bottle is going unexplained would work very well. And the only reason I'm stressing about it so hard is it feels like all of the angles for him to be explained are exhausted. He's at the top of the food chain. All the homunculi are aspects of him. So that's explained fine, but Father's his own weird fucking thing. I don't know how the show explains him at all. Unless he's a truth level entity that somehow exists and can operate outside of whatever realm he's supposed to be inhabiting. That's really the only thing I can think of. Okay, so with all of that in mind, theory time. So on top of all of this, it's revealed that Hohenheim is now a Philosopher's Stone in the form of a man. And whatever Father was, I believe now, at the very least, on some level, he also has to be classified as a homunculi, since he's a fake human. But all of the other homunculi are powered by a Philosopher's Stone, which means that probably Hohenheim is Father's Philosopher's Stone, and how they beat Father will be they kill Hohenheim and therefore kill Father. Did I nail it? Did I snipe it from 15 episodes out? I think that's a pretty good guess. Okay, so there's still stuff to talk about them outside of the backstory. So the big circle plan, the plan is obvious now, but its outcome is still the mystery. The Philosopher's Boulder seems unlikely now because we know what happened in Xerxes, but there's still no answer to what Father actually wants out of this giant sacrifice. It seems that all 5 of his sacrifices all don't just have to be alchemists, they have to be people that have met truth. So Tobias, Teacher, and Hohenheim are all valid. Why they all have to be truth seers is a total mystery. Why Hohenheim called the alchemy drawing a reverse transmutation circle is still a mystery. Why did clearly Envy go and mess up Edward's reputation in that mining town? That's a mystery. Why did Kimberly have to draw a seal of blood or whatever at Briggs? Does that have to be done at every major site along the circle? A mystery. And I may be showing my hand here as incredibly dense and just straight up missing something, or I may have done that already. But is what the Promised Day actually is still a mystery? Like, am I crazy? Did they just start talking about it like they all know exactly what it is and when it is without informing me? Like, okay, okay, I can put together it's gonna be the day when Father executes his plan, but do we know why Edward knows it's this day specifically? I guess Hohenheim tells Edward about a solar eclipse, and that's important, but they start talking about a day of reckoning before that reveal. I feel kinda lost on this, and I'm not sure if it's because I missed it somehow, or because of the way the show likes to tell its story that I actually have a decently sized gripe with that I'll mention later. There's still a lot going on, so much that I'm sort of worried the show is running out of time to execute it all. 15 episodes left, and while that is not a short amount of time, there is a lot to answer and tie up. But I keep hearing over and over, everything will be explained and everything is done very well, and this show has impressed me before, so I hold out hope it will again. So if Father is basically a clone of Hohenheim, and the sins are the quotation children of Father, does that make the Homunculi and Edward and Alphonse cousins? No, because Father is basically a clone, so it would make them half-siblings? Half-siblings for Edward and Alphonse, but from the Homunculi's side, they're full siblings, because they're only that half, right? Let's split the difference. We'll call them three-quarter siblings. So the Hohenheim backstory and the connection to Father are obviously great revelations from this chunk of episodes, but that's a surprisingly small amount of what actually goes on in this run, as we learn more about what the show first decided to call the Day of Reckoning, but quickly changed its mind to call the Promised Day. Tobias and Hohenheim finally come across each other, and the show actually does a really good, subtle job of making sure to show the different peoples of Amestris. It does this because the stakes of sacrificing the entire country, for whatever reason it ends up being, needs to be grounded in feeling like it is a country or it doesn't work. We see Central and Briggs, of course, but we also visit smaller towns. We go back to Lior. The show highlights that there are just average people living average lives that are just about to be caught up in all of this. And that helps the struggle feel effective. These guys aren't just fighting for faceless nobodies, they're fighting for these people. The people rebuilding towns or living in slums. I think that's a very important element that the show nails. If we just laser focused on the few groups acting in a vacuum around one another, the conflict could feel smaller than it actually should be. The stakes are the entire country's population, and it's good that the show shows us that population. And not only that, the actual main team continues to balloon outward to show that all these different peoples have to take a stand against Father. It was just a small splinter group of the military before, but now we also have chimeras and a homunculus on our side, a former Ishvalan enemy, another weird being that is tied to this more than we still probably know. Everything is coming together to show the wide-reaching stakes that the show has to execute on. I said just a second ago that I'm sort of worried the show is running out of time, and there are elements that ease those worries and also elements that exacerbate them. Like when Mei Chang was gonna leave, I literally thought that was gonna be it for her. When you think about it, she doesn't really have a lot going on in the story that isn't covered by other characters, and we have a load of characters that have joined in and still our main cast that needs a ton of stuff paid off. Her just walking home seemed like it would make sense to me, but nah, she comes back. There are moments scattered throughout that I think do make a lot of sense in the way of pacing though, and I thought the Mei Chang thing was gonna be one of them. For example, starting to knock off all of the homunculi makes sense right now. The only two acting homunculi now are Pride and Wrath whenever he comes back from the train bombing, because there's no way he's dead, right? And Greed too, he's a good guy now. And I think all the homunculi have been taken out with an appropriate level of seriousness, though maybe Envy's was a bit rushed. Regardless, those kind of moments fill me with hope that this show can indeed pull off all this crazy stuff that needs to be resolved. But then there are other character moments that bother me. Scar really jumps out at me in these episodes as someone who was really fallen off of a cliff. Someone who was once an extremely motivated and violent antagonist is now totally on our side due to largely convenience and a few lines from one other Ishvalan and Winry's mindset. Before Winry starts treating him, he's still resigned to this mindset there is nothing anyone can do to right the cycle of violence. No words can fix the action, so he accepts his part in it. The Winry thing, which I think should be the larger of the two factors, is even kind of glossed over. Winry continues to do her parents' work and help Scar when he's injured, and I like that a lot for her, deciding that she will do good despite the evil that was done to her. Acting on Edward's words that her hands were meant to give life, not take it, which gives Scar a moment of pause, clearly taken aback at someone whose parents he's killed willingly helping him. But what's treated as the real moment, at least it's the moment that gets a flashback out of Scar, is when he talks to Miles, a guy who shares his features, yes, but certainly not his struggles or backstory. And he tells him that he wants to change Amestris for the better, not destroy it. And this moment seems to mind meld Scar into having an entirely different outlook. And listen, I'm not saying that those two moments couldn't have a big effect on someone, especially the Winry Winry thing, but Scar being cooperative and working alongside of us still feels so sudden. And I know that in the grand scheme of him being on the good guy's side, he is still technically working to depose the government, so his goals haven't really changed all that much, but Scar losing all hostility to the country's people and its military subordinates after those short moments still feels incredibly rushed to me. And Scar was one of my favorite elements of the show. Every scene he was in demanded that he be in the spotlight, but now with this new character revelation, he can sort of fall into the background. He's far less interesting, and that's a real shame. And that kind of thing really worries me. I hope the show can take more care with its other characters and their big moments moving forward. The other characters, though, in this chunk of episodes, I find it's a lot more of the same, and that's not necessarily a terrible thing. I just don't think Edward and Alphonse are really getting anywhere character-wise. And maybe that's just their lot in their show. Edward and Alphonse have already both grown over the course of the series. Edward, I think, has calmed some and become more accepting, and Alphonse has become more confident and assertive, but with how big and important the actual plot is now, I think they may just be in their final character forms already. And that may end up being utterly naive to say, I don't know, but I just don't see the show really asking new things of them very often. The big one that's left over is Edward learning to see things from Hohenheim's side, and obviously learning about why exactly he left, and that'll be a big hurdle for him. Edward saw Hohenheim as this giant, unfeeling man that abandoned him and his brother and his mother, and now Edward is faced with the reality that it seems like Hohenheim is quite the opposite. And I'm glad he seems a bit angry and confused over this, and a bit confused at why he's angry. Alphonse, I'm remiss to say, once again, feels pretty static. He's suffering, he's going through this soul tug-of-war thing, and I still like him a lot as a character, but I was hoping by this point of the series I would see him as more than Edward's brother in the big suit of armor. He still pushes the ideas that he's always been pushing, that being human, truly human, is more than just looking human. It's about how you act and feel in your heart and mind, and those are all very admirable beliefs to hold and bestow onto others, but he's had this mindset for the entire show, and he's been saying these things for the entire show, and he's only faltered here and there. I just wish there was more to him. By the way, whose suit of armor is this anyway? I always assumed it was Hohenheim since it was in the basement, but now seeing Al and Hohenheim standing next to each other, there's no way that's the case. Did the early show actually depict Hohenheim as broader or bigger, or am I crazy? Maybe it was because we were seeing him through Edward's mind, or I'm crazy. Winry really tries to push Tobias to change, which I really appreciate, which may in fact be a change I hadn't really caught on to that did take place. Oh wait, now hold on, let me think. Oh, I did notice, by the way, after the time skip, the height change for Edward. He's got taller. I caught it. You can't trick me. At one point, Winry tells Ed and Al to stop trying to take on all the burden of everything on all alone. And they really have. Early in the show, Edward seemed annoyed when he was saddled with anyone other than his brother, even if they were friendly. But now, Edward's taken on a full team of misfits, accepted help from people who were his enemies, accepted help from Homunculi. He isn't taking the entire burden anymore. He is leaning on people and trusting them to help him, which is nice. Let's get into my biggest issue with how this show operates. I don't think the way it does this is bad in a vacuum or once in a while at all, but I think it does it too much. So many times in this show, a scene plays out, and it could really be any scene, one centering around dialogue or action or anything, and as the scene plays out, it's revealed that behind the scenes, there's actually been a plan put into motion that solves the dicey situation, and in fact, the characters were always in little to no danger at all. Like I said, not bad once in a while, but a lot of the conflict in these episodes is solved this way, especially in the latter half. I was clearly already aware of the show doing it, as when the whole Scar kidnaps Winry thing played out, I was very aware that that was all just theater. And you could easily and correctly argue that you could easily infer that from how the prior scene with Scar and Winry was going, that this wouldn't make any sense to result from that. You're right, but it happens again with Jumping Envy, and again with bombing Bradley, and it happens again with Mustang attacking the Capitol plot, and again with the Mustang attacking the Capitol plot, and again with the Mustang attacking the Capitol plot. And I know all the Mustang instances are all set up with the clever message dropping scenes where everyone knows Salim is a homunculus, so they're obviously privy to at least some of what Mustang is planning, and that's just off screen, but it happens over and over, and it can just become a bit too predictable. It really is a shame that the Mustang and Hawkeye plot, which I really was enjoying with all the code talk and covert messaging, all that added up to a series of events that just sort of got tired. And it happens again in the Pride fight. It almost becomes so ubiquitous in scenes of conflict in this run of episodes, it was shocking when Edward lost to Kimberly and got horribly gored. I was like, fuck yeah, Edward's dying, yes! And I realized, even while I was watching it, this actually solves one of my biggest complaining points with anime action. I whine about how anime has all these moments of internal dialogue and slow motion, and because of all of these scenes playing out in rapid fashion, because of the more and more obvious twist reveals of there being an unshown strategy, there's no need for all of that. The scenes can play out, and then you can think back to how it may have been subtly set up beforehand, or the characters can explain to you how the plan was come up with after the fact, leaving the action and the moments of adrenaline in the show to just do their thing. And that line of thinking, I think, is absolutely correct once in a while. If you do anything too much, it becomes stale, and yeah, how scenes play out have become a little too formulaic. It can be really effective in a narrative when you look back on a scene in a new light because of new information you've been given. Like Trisha saying she would die before Hohenheim rings a lot difference once you know that she knew that Hohenheim was immortal. But when it's in every episode and just random action scenes, it can almost feel like the show is being told out of order just for the sake of it. It's really great when real impromptu fight scenes do play out, like Edward versus those Chimera guys he ends up befriending, or Edward versus those Chimera guys he ends up befriending. One of Edward's best character traits is that he's very intelligent and he can think on his feet, so when he's actually caught in a jam and has to think to use dynamite to make some toxic gas, that's awesome. It makes the show feel dynamic. And I gotta give it to the show, the moments where the alchemists use their power to change the state or composition of things do really always make me ask why it isn't done more just naturally, and I think anyone would ask that, but when the action scenes are playing out, I'm never really asking that as they're happening. The show does a really good job of making the battle scenes seem like all of the available resources are being used, and luckily my point from the OP3 video was proven correct. I think that may have just been a dicey chunk of episodes action-wise. The action present in these episodes is back to looking pretty great. The little Greed and Brad fight scene was cool, and that really highlights just how emotional the homunculi really are. They are two basically unkillable beings fighting each other just because one is pissed. It's irrational and human despite Greed being inhuman. Pride, the homunculi who seems most monstrous out of all of them, when he's trapped with Al with nothing to do, tells Al that he actually found Brad's wife to be nice and that he found his time with her to be pleasant. He finds the emotional range and warmness of humans to be interesting. Not interesting enough to care majorly, but still, it's a little wrinkle that adds a little bit of depth to him. He's still banging Morse code or something onto Alphonse's head, so it's not like Pride is gonna switch sides or something. But all of these definitely human traits tied to the homunculi really highlights the fact that Father is so inhuman now, but he wasn't back when he was a weird floating orb. I think I even said he lacks the emotions of the other homunculi in a prior video, so that's pretty funny. Despite gaining human form, he has made himself more inhuman than ever. More explanation of the transhumanism theme that largely centers around Alphonse. Let's see here, who else? Thankfully Kimberly disappears from the show after maiming Ed, so I didn't have to deal with him very much at all. But I do have to give it to him, when he is around, he pushes the matter at hand, so the show is always dynamic when he's in a scene. I just don't like him much outside of that factor. The characters that contrast Kimberly so much, like Armstrong and Mustang, get less screen time this time, so him being around would probably be even less interesting, so him sort of disappearing makes sense too. Honestly, I'm surprised he's still alive. Overall, I think this run of episodes may have been the chunk that I've had the most problems with, as detailed in this very video, but there's still obviously a ton of praise. Like, the show never dips into slightly boring or forgettable, or any kind of bad. The show is really good, but like any show or any story, there are themes that, if you notice them, your brain tends to notice them more and more. I think the show has set itself up to be really quite a solid show from front to back, and maybe an incredible show if it closes out strongly, but it has a lot to do, and only about 15 episodes to pull it off. I call that a pretty tall order. As I've said over and over in these reviews, I know the show is regarded extremely highly by a lot of people, so that gives me a lot of hope for what it can pull off, but we'll have to wait and see how it all wraps up next time. This is it, the final run. Luckily, I bring into this viewing the helpful comments from last video, many of which were mad at me that I didn't understand the floating orb was a homunculus. No, I understand that, it's just from how it's been told. It seems to me it also has to be a lot more than just a homunculus. The other big one was the mark of blood at Briggs, which does make a lot of sense now that it's been explained to me. My confusion there was that I thought since only now the entire circle was complete, there would have to be further massacres at all the important sites along it to actually complete it. It didn't occur to me that all the bloodshed from like decades prior would still count, which is pretty dumb considering how long it probably took to dig the tunnel. I think those were the big ones. Very useful to have a comment section full of people to help you out or imply you were dropped on your head as a child for misunderstanding things. As I've said, it's a dense show. There's a lot going on. I believe on a first watch through, it's only natural to miss some things, fail to connect some dots. Hopefully now, when I'm done watching this final batch, all will come together. I think it's got a lot to do and enough time to do it, but it's close, so let's finish it off. The ending opening, we're finally here. With this, we can finally decide the order from best to worst, which obviously reads as this: 2 by a lot, and then 1 by a pretty decent amount, and then 4, and then 5, and then a giant gaping chasm to finish it out with 3. That being said, none of them are bad per se, that's just my taste, and OP5 being second last on the list doesn't mean I don't enjoy it, it's pretty good. There's a lot to like this time, especially in the direction of it. Small side note first though, is this tree really important overlooking the city? It's been around before, but I'm not sure what it means. Winry's here in the first half of this opening, and then Dubai's are here again at the end, and they were of course here in OP2 as well. Like, does the tree represent represent home, and then they look out over the evil, corrupt city, maybe? Back in OP2, it was raining while they were here, and then the sun came out, which happens again in this one. Which, of course, you know coming into this video, I love, because it puts a beautiful bookend on the theme of Edward reaching out for his mother, as in all of the other openings near the beginnings, he reaches out for his mother, or the heavens, etc. And then to close out the final one, the clouds part, the sun comes out, and the visage of his mother is finally reaching back for him. I've never been more right. God, it was electric seeing that. I've never been that high. Sorry, I'll chill. It's kind of interesting that the opening shows it's pouring down rain for the entirety of the last arc's events. Of course, before the sun comes out and everyone is filled with hope, and the symbolism is clearly that we are in our most downtrodden, desperate moments here where things are looking their worst, but light will still prevail. Yeah, it's all lovely. But then during the show, despite the coup, insurrection, whatever you want to call it, where buildings are exploding, many people are dying, there's about to be a human sacrifice on an unimaginable scale, all this terrible shit happening, but it's a beautiful day for it. You think Father's plans would have been thwarted if it was cloudy that day and you couldn't see the eclipse? Anyway, yeah, visually, despite the colors being so downtrodden because of the choice to set it in the rain, I think this might be my favorite opening just based on visuals alone. Like, clearly these shots from OP2 were the best for me, but overall, I think this one might take it. It's just got a lot of sauce. The choice to light the first shot almost like we're back in episode 1 is a cool one, back on the rooftops, because we've learned so much. And it seems the ice guy, Alchemist, from all the way back then was actually working with a lot of the same interests that the main cast has now. It's almost like it's come full circle. I like the shot a lot with Father and the Homunculi erupting from Hoenheim. The red and blue good and evil imagery continues as well. I think the shot of the dwarf's eye, seeing all of the future sacrifices as foreshadowing to the fact that the 5th sacrifice will be Mustang, is a very clever and really cool looking shot. And I've noticed that these openings don't really depict exact situations that take place in the show, but it still shows us circumstances that will come up, like who will face who in a fight, and I think that's just the right amount of keeping things on topic without giving away too much. I like that a lot. A close-up on Mustang's eye as he spirals into the void because truth takes his vision. Wow, there's a lot to really like in this opening from an art direction. It's pretty sweet. Honestly, maybe it jumps to number 3 on my list just because of that. I don't know, they're close. The only part I can't really find anything to decipher for is the shot of Winry looking like truth. I'm not quite sure what that's referencing or could mean. It's clear Edward is reaching for her, but as he does, he recoils and his colors fade away. It could be referring to Edward's love for Winry, but he knows loving someone as deeply as he loved his mother can lead to feelings of horrible loss, and that's why she looks like truth. What do you guys think? That's the only bit I'm kind of wondering on. All in all, pretty solid opening, just like the rest of them. This show does openings right. Okay, with the opening out of the way, I gotta see if I can put the ending into words. Like, plot-wise, let's see if I actually understood what was going on. This is a very dense show, and like I said, I don't think missing things here and there and missing connections you're supposed to make on a first viewing is anything to be ashamed of, so I'm not embarrassed to admit that I had to go back and watch the last handful of episodes again to really figure out what was happening. Okay, let me break it down like on one of those ending explain channels, except I don't know for sure if I'm actually right. I imagine I'll have at least some of it wrong. So Father sacrificed Xerxes and placed all of the souls of that population in himself and Hohenheim, 50% each. There's also an enormous Philosopher's Stone beneath Amestris, which he's plugged into a lot of the time, that I assume also had to be made during that interaction because I'm not sure where it came from otherwise. That giant Philosopher's Stone is tied to the magic of all Amestrian alchemy, giving Father the ability to choose who can transmute while they're near him. Okay, that's the setup. The actual plan is to make a big circle, have it drawn out and completed by committing acts of giant violence at key points along it, and have Sloth dig an actual physical circle. All of that by the time a solar eclipse happens. The solar eclipse is important because the sun and the moon represent the male and female form, so when the two come together, they represent a perfect being, or God, as we learn. God and truth are the same being. Father also starts to talk about some Gaia theory stuff, where the Earth is actually a living organism, and that is important for some reason, and I'll be honest, I don't really know why that's important, but he mentions it once and then never again, but it is in there. So Father's plan is to use the big circle along with the 5 sacrifices, who will have to be truth seers. Not entirely clear on why that's the case, but I guess it's just because this is a very special transmutation. The sacrifices, even though they're called sacrifices, are not actually killed during this process, they just need to be present. The people that are actually sacrificed is the entire population of Amestris this time. All of their souls leave their bodies. These souls are used in the transaction with truth, and as Mustang says, there are about 50 million of them, which is enough of a toll on the equivalent exchange meter that Father can open up a gate to the truth zone, to the real world, and absorb truth into himself and become all-powerful. I suppose that means because he absorbs truth, he actually keeps all of the souls he just sacrificed anyway. So basically, he's an untouchable god now. However, Hohenheim has a counter strategy. Hohenheim has left Philosopher's Stones of his own creation, using the souls of the people of Xerxes he has within him to create them, and has left them along the edges of what will be the moon's shadow that will be cast upon the earth when the eclipse happens. happens, giving him another enormous circle that he can transmute with. He uses this immediately after Father executes his plan, and uses those souls to somehow spiritually damage Father in yet another massive transmutation. So much so that Father is forced to release a massive amount of the Emestrian souls, though not all of them, leaving him to still be hugely powerful but not godlike. Scar then uses alchemy, which is not fundamentally tied to the style of alchemy used in Amestris, and thus unaffected by Father's philosopher's boulder he has hidden underground, to use another enormous circle, this time as something called a reverse transmutation circle, which is this unique design we keep seeing, to turn off Father's control on who gets to transmute around him, meaning that Debais can actually fight him. A combination of Father being unable to contain the power of truth housed within him without all the Emestrian souls to power him, and an unrelenting series of attacks from the main cast, as well as an incredibly weird play by Greed. I didn't know he could use the impenetrable shield thing in reverse. All adds up to Father finally being defeated. Wow, that was a lot to keep up with in the final 3 or 4 episodes it was all jammed into. Okay, so I know I probably missed a factor or two or misunderstood something, but I think those are all the broad strokes. And for what it is, I think that adds up to a pretty cool final conflict and solution. With that being said though, as you know with this channel, nothing I ever review has ever been purely positive or purely negative, not even Avatar. So yeah, despite liking it after wrapping my head around it, I do still have some problems with it. My main one being the pacing of these last 15 episodes. I was really surprised to see that the final quarter of this show is all one ongoing conflict. It's all the sacking of the capital and the military movement around it, as well as the more intimate moments between our characters and the actual bad guys. And for the first, I want to say over half of the season, it's really just military minutia happening, while our main characters are set up to be in scenes of high tension, but we only really ever revisit them for moments at a time, and those scenes aren't pushed much further in those moments. I was really surprised with how much had to be revealed, that the show took its time so much in actually getting to the reveal. And then when we finally do get to all of the big bombshells being dropped, we've only got 4 episodes to reveal them, hope the audience can keep up with them, and then do the big battle. And I think it all comes back to the fact that while the scale and stakes of the conflict are enormous, the story is that the bad guy has to jump through all these hoops to complete their goal, which are largely kept in secret and thus don't take up much time code. And really the main cast goal is to get to the main villain and stop him. And at this point in the story, you can only put so many speed bumps in front of them, so the military stuff eats up a lot of these last episodes. And I'm gonna be honest, man, I don't care about Buccaneer dying. I don't care about Brad's wife at the radio station. It's cool that all these elements are involved and the story brings back a ton of stuff from earlier in the show, but man, give me more of Ling and Greed versus Brad, or Scar versus Brad, or more Alphons in general. This show has built up some really solid characters that I really do like, but I found it a bit disappointing that when everything is coming to a head, we only get precious few seconds with each one of them in the episodes leading up to the end. Like the Sloth stuff, him versus the Armstrongs takes up more time in a couple of episodes than we see Edward dealing with the homunculus soldiers. And while there are elements I like about that conflict, like I don't know how they did it, but eventually the Armstrong just being fucking yoked and flexing joke did break me down. I ended up liking it. And I do like the idea behind Sloth is that he's actually the fastest of the homunculi, and the sloth element of his character is that he's usually too lazy to actually use that speed. I kept finding myself thinking, man, it seems like there's still a lot to solve in the main plot that this screen time could be getting used for. And I do still think that, but at the same time, with how the final battle is set up, really with how the entire series is set up, I don't really know how you do these reveals to take up more of the time code. Really, the show is a mystery when it comes down to it. The entire show is all about what the hell is going on behind the scenes and pulling at threads, and the characters trying to piece together what the hell is going on before it happens. And they only get so far in that pursuit. They figure out a pretty decent chunk of it, but by the time the eclipse comes around, there's still a lot to have to find out and figure out how to understand, but only a couple things left for Father to actually have to execute on. Basically, what I'm trying to say, I think if you zoom out and look at the final conflict as a whole, there's a 3-way imbalance of how much information the characters and audience have, the time actually dedicated to learning and having to deal with those consequences of Father's plan, and the overall time the conflict actually takes to get going, to when things actually get down to the nitty-gritty and start mattering a lot. So now with all that being said, and all of the Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood superfans have worked themselves into a frothing rage, I'm gonna say I actually like this last chunk of episodes quite a bit. A big thing that stuck out to me is that despite not being totally invested in all of the conflicts, the shows never look better. The final battle, as soon as the main cast comes face to face with Father and the ritual starts, especially that stuff, it's all very solid art and animation wise. And it took me the entire show to realize that if you just put Brad in a scene, for some reason the animators start caring a lot and want this dude to be animated as crazy as possible. And whoever has the privilege to be his opponent also gets that same treatment. Seriously, every time this dude is in a scene, it looks incredible. I wish he was in more. I had a question though, as the episodes went on. It seemed like all the other homunculi can shrug off massive damage and heal right away, unless it's a ton of sustained damage over a short period of time. Which is why I rolled my eyes a little bit when Sloth was simply punched to death by two really strong guys, but anyway. Brad seems to take damage and retain that damage, despite his homunculus status. And that confused me for a bit, but I reason now that it's because he originally was a human, and his Philosopher's Stone is probably only his own soul infused with it. The other homunculi who have a ton of them, meaning that maybe his regenerative powers are much weaker. That's how I chose to think about it, at least. I think it makes sense. Not trying to make excuses for the show or anything, but what else would the logic be, you know? And I guess while we're talking about the homunculi, we should knock the other ones off, so let's keep track. I like Brad's ending. I didn't much care for Sloth's, but then again, Sloth was the least interesting by a mile, so though I didn't like his ending, it also didn't bother me much because I didn't care. Envy is next, and I like theirs a lot. I like that with a lot of the homunculi's endings, you get a further context into why they have their name. And a lot of Envy's comes down to, even though they've been told and believe they are greater than humans for their entire existence, they still feel a jealousy towards the connections that humans can make between each other. Envy has constantly been the snarkiest, the most full of themselves, the one that underestimated and looked down on humans the most, and is called out on their actual hidden feelings of loneliness. But not just that, after being defeated by humans on multiple occasions now, has to face the fact that because of the human connections they're able to form, they are in fact many times stronger than Envy could ever hope to be. And the most toxic and sure of themselves member of the family ends up killing themselves because they just can't accept the reality that they aren't as great as they've always held themselves up to be. I think that's a wonderful and sad ending for a character that I haven't talked about much in these reviews, but overall was a villain I actually really enjoyed. I think it was a great decision to not have Envy just be defeated in the snow that one time. I think looking back on it, a decent chunk of why I didn't like that scene was that I didn't like that was how Envy was going to go out. So Envy's end, great. 10 out of 10. Would watch the little green nematode thing off itself again. Pride chomped Gluttony last season, and Gluttony getting eaten is sort of funny. Haha, nice moment. So well done. But that also makes me wonder, if Pride did that and absorbed Gluttony's sense of smell, does that also mean that Pride is now a failed portal to truth and now also has that never-ending void inside of him? Whatever, sorry. It's a bad habit of mine to just put completely random thoughts in these scripts that don't go anywhere. It's the overanalyzer in me. Pride's end is a bit of a confusing one to me. I don't really know how to feel about it. So they force human transmutation onto Mustang, and while it isn't really explained, I think doing that weakened Pride in a big way somehow. Because afterwards he's falling apart and doesn't seem to be able to fight as hard as he usually can. And because of this, Edward can overpower him, and, well, I'll just let the show say it.
Impossible! He's turned himself into a Philosopher's Stone and now he's forcing his way inside me!
You what?
And I mean, I've praised this show before about constantly looking at all of the possible angles of the magic system and reversing things and flipping things on their head, asking hard questions, having cool reveals about how the magic can work. But when Pride said this, I was completely lost. When Ed got gored earlier on, he said he could use his own life force to sort of human transmute himself and heal himself. So this using yourself as the magic thing doesn't come out of nowhere, but it still seems like a crazy pull to just be like, oh, he's doing it and using it to defeat one of your main villains. Luckily, the moment is sort of saved by, you won't believe I'm saying this, but Kimberly of all people. Kimberly is also eaten by Pride and somehow finds a way to keep his individuality and sabotages Pride from the inside as this is happening. And it's really cool to me that he only does this because Pride goes back on his way of thinking, a lot like Envy's realization that the humans did outclass them and did beat them. Pride has a similar realization and says that he will steal Edward's body since his current one is falling apart. And Kimberly and I agree that this is a hypocritical move from Pride. If you're so much better than the humans, why is it that you need to steal one of their bodies to defeat them? Aren't you Pride? Shouldn't this thought disgust you? So Kimberly's survival of the fittest mindset comes all the way back around. He suddenly sees Pride as deserving of defeat and death because he doubled back on his mindset and values. And I think this little moment from Kimberly adds a nice little flair to his character. I still don't think Kimberly was an amazing character by any stretch, but seeing that he applies his logic so broadly and so plainly and refuses to budge on it, no matter the context, no matter the side or person it applies to, adds a strange depth to his character that I can appreciate. So anyway, Pride is defeated and turned into a baby thing that's the size of your thumb for some reason. I don't know. Anyone got anything for this one? Because I don't know why. Because all the other homunculus just turn into dust, right? But then it turns out he grows up again and he seems like he's a pretty normal, nice kid, and I don't really know why. Can someone help me out on this one? Pride's ending is really, really something I'm not sure how to take or feel about. It left me more confused than anything. And finally, Greed, who, as the show closed out, the combination between Greed and Ling, I found actually ended up being one of my favorite characters. It felt really natural how their dynamic evolved from being so hostile and one-sided to having them begrudgingly have to work together at points, to actively working together and actually being friends by the end. I didn't really notice how much I was liking it until the end, when Greed died. Maybe that's just because Ling is a likable guy, and a bad guy becoming a good guy is always a recipe to see them in a very positive light. But but still, Greed is just fun. The idea that Ling poses to him that the one thing he truly wants is something that he as a homunculi should never naturally have, that being human connection, is great. Envy couldn't grasp how the humans could be greater than them for it, and Greed subconsciously pined for that connection. And in the end, he actually did end up making friends that he could count on and eventually would die for. Greed, despite his name, in the end, gave up everything for the people he connected to. Lovely. I think definitely the best out of all of them. Greed was great. Well, since we've covered all the other villains, let's round it out with Father, aka what the fuck even is it in the flask? A lot of people were upset with me that I didn't know it was Homunculus last time, and as I explained, I understand that. I still do think the story sort of demands that it be more than that, though. So it's a being that's made from Hohenheim's blood, and I assume some real sideways hocus pocus ass science or alchemy that somehow spawned this little bastard. What's damning to me is how much Father seems to know even before he's let out of the flask and gains a body. He is so informed, and even if he learns all this from being in an alchemy lab, it still seems incredibly strange to me that he could set up all the sacrifice of Xerxes under everyone's noses, including the other alchemists in Hohenheim, and just get away with it without anyone realizing, at least roughly, what he's trying to do. It seems to me he's created already having extremely esoteric knowledge of the world and the magic system, and to me, I thought that meant he was somehow something more. And I still feel like he might be, but on what level, I don't know. Him bringing up the Gaia theory stuff and the big circle plan is all reasonably stuff he put together after the sacrifice of Xerxes. No problem with that, but after he's defeated and he meets Truth, he seems utterly confused. And there's this little detail that I noticed. After Edward mentions everyone gets their own individual portal to Truth, it's that Edward's is decorated in this symbol that has to do with alchemical knowledge. Or at least I'm pretty sure that's it. There's a lot of symbols in this show. But Father's portal is completely blank, despite him definitely knowing a lot about the magic system and how the world works. And the only thing I can think of is that this is implying that though he gained knowledge and power, he did it through the wrong avenues, stole power and knowledge from others, and thus Truth doesn't recognize it as his. And Father, despite having all this power and knowledge only moments ago, seems at a total loss to why Truth didn't see or understand his greatness. He doesn't even seem to know what truth is, which I kind of think clashes with the esoteric knowledge he seemed to have to be born with. But maybe he just understands that truth or God does exist, but doesn't really understand the true nature of what it is, and that's what he's asking. I said last video that if Father did just turn out to be a largely unexplained entity, I'd be kind of disappointed in taking it in that direction, and yeah, I think that is where I sit with it. It's not like a soul-crushing disappointment, it's just what Father is and seems to be seems so interesting. To not get any further explanation on him seems a little lame to me. If you step back and look at what the story of Father is, it's that there was a monster that was created by unknown means that is super evil and wants to be all-powerful, and that's his entire origin and entire motivation. And while, don't get me wrong, I'm not above that sort of storytelling by any means, I thought the show was setting up more to do with it. That's all I'm saying. I think talking about the characters is going to be the vast majority of this video, because like I said, and I feel like this might be one of those things that people might not notice, the last 15 episodes of the show is really just the one big conflict that sometimes takes its time a lot and sometimes flies by at the speed of light. Let's work our way up to the main characters. Since we're closing out this series, I would feel remiss if I didn't mention some tertiary characters that I didn't give much of a spotlight to before. I ended up really liking Hawkeye. I'm not sure what it is about her. It's clear that her and Mustang have a thing for each other, but I think it's really endearing that they're both so professional and have such a history together and have such a respect for each other that neither of them even really hint at liking one another. But it still comes across that there probably is more than just a friendship there. I think that's really nice writing. By the way, I called that double fake out thing with the envy thing. I called that at the end of the episode. You can't trick me, show. Winry is another character that I like, and I think the show really did as much with her as they could. Her and Edward obviously like each other a lot, and I think she sort of ends up standing in for the people of the country for Edward, you know what I mean? Edward has a lot of people he cares about and wants to save, but Winry is the one that isn't involved in the main plot, that he still loves and wants to protect, that isn't in the fight. He's fighting for everyone around him, but he's fighting for her too, and with Winry just being a mechanic, I think that's a good enough use for her, but I also wish she got some more screen time and got to be around Edward and Alphonse more. I was surprised when the show ended and we didn't get a revelation of feelings for each other between Ed and Winry, or a kiss, but I think the photo of their future family during the closing credits was a great final touch. I like that a lot. I never really found a moment to place this comment anywhere across all of these reviews, but does anyone else find it strange just how often members of the upper staff of the government are brought up for one or two scenes here and there and then are just dropped? Then a few episodes later there's another one and then it happens again and again. I guess it's pretty effective in showing how large the establishment really is and how many people are against the main cast, but I always find myself thinking, okay, well now who's this guy whenever it happened? And a lot of the time they didn't really matter. Anyway, who else? The Armstrongs? Like I said, the Major beat me into submission. He's fine, but I don't really see myself liking the General very much. He's just not really my kind of character. Wait, oh yeah, Teacher. What the fuck is Teacher doing doing here? You know what I mean? Like, they're aware of the sacrifice plan. They're aware Teacher is planned to be one of them. Why the hell is she even in the country, let alone the capital? If they just sent her away to the desert or Shing or something for the day, Father's plan is thwarted, right? Or I guess any of them. You could do it with Ed or Al or Hohenheim too, but they're kind of in the shit, you know what I mean? They're involved. Teacher, though, she's got no skin in the game. Send her ass out for a day. And then the issue is at least diverted, right? If not outright solved. All that being said, I like Teacher. I'm glad she was here. Always a pleasure. Scar was one of my favorite characters around the middle of the series. I found his point of view of doling out vengeance and knowing what he was doing wasn't right or good in the traditional sense, but his own view of justice overrode that logic, and he was aware that eventually that life would lead him to his death. This horrible mindset would be applied to him eventually. And with where Scar ends up, I like the direction he went in, but I'm not sure if I entirely love the route he took to get there. His scope was narrowed to attacking instead of every single state alchemist he sees. He instead focuses on the real evil that caused the near extinction of his people, that being the upper brass of the government and Father. Him learning new things and changing his target, but his overall goal of avenging his people staying the same is entirely logical, and I get that completely. But what was so interesting about Scar, to me at least, gets lost in that transition. He learns of these things and is shown compassion, but he doesn't really have much trouble flipping sides. Once his side is flipped, he sort of just becomes part of the team. He doesn't have much agency of his own that isn't also just the agency of the group as a whole. And that's what was so interesting about Scar to me, his motivation and his skewed vision of justice. So when he doesn't seem to have much trouble in getting over those elements of his mindset that seem to be dominating his life, I just feel like he could have been used for so much more interesting stuff. I don't mind at all Scar ending up where he does, with a better outlook, wanting to help change the world and help Mustang rebuild his nation. I like that a lot for him, but I think somewhere in the middle there, if he had a harder time changing his views, was more chained to his thoughts of disgust and hatred, and then overcame them to become the better version of himself, that would have worked a lot better for me. Moving right on up the ladder of importance, next is Mustang, who was another character that I liked for the whole run, but ended up liking him even more as the show closed out. Him getting his vision stolen and not being broken by it and still fighting and wanting to make the world a better place is great, and him finally learning that Envy was the one who killed his friend and humbling them so viciously was amazing. There is something I don't agree with the show on when it comes to Mustang though. When Mustang is about to kill Envy, finally really kill them, his friends stop them. Edward and Hawkeye both tell him that killing Envy in rage and for revenge isn't something that he would do. And for me, that moment just seems a little hokey. Mustang has always been an extremely decisive character, no qualms in using violence or trickery or whatever to do what he believes is the correct thing to do. And everyone around him, up until now, has been pretty alright with him doing whatever he needs to do. But Edward and Hawkeye reason that if he kills Envy in anger, then that's a sign he won't be a good leader for the country, or he won't be able to take it back. With Edward, I suppose the logic is that Edward seems to respect and want to preserve basically all life. He doesn't even want to kill the homunculi soldiers. And Hawkeye doesn't want to see her best friend do something so brutal in anger. And I get that they both bring these perspectives when wanting to talk down Mustang, but maybe I'm just a bad person because of this, but I agree with angry Mustang. Hawkeye even says that she'll kill Envy for him, so like, it's not like Envy's getting out of this anyway. And I think Mustang is more than justified in killing Envy in anger for everything they've done, and especially for killing his friend Hughes and then laughing about it. His anger is extremely well placed and justified, and anger as a human isn't always bad. It often is, but when it's placed like this, pointed at a monster that did personal damage to you and is actively taking part in the killing of 50 million people, I don't know if the lesson of a leader shouldn't act in anger really sticks for me. I don't think blasting Envy one final time would have changed Mustang for the worse here at all, and the show implying that it would missed pretty big time for me. Though I don't agree with the lesson the show is trying to teach me, Mustang relenting and agreeing with his friends on its own in a vacuum wasn't all that bad. That's his decision as a character to make after all, but the idea just wasn't my favorite. Other than that little hurdle, Mustang is probably safely in my top 5 characters. There's just a confidence to him that I like, a lot of no-nonsense to him that I think won me over early on in the show because the show needed it when it was a lot goofier. But he also has this cute little dynamic with Hawkeye and does have a little bit of fun here and there too. Yeah, Mustang just kind of rules. It's funny, you know, you start this show and you see a lot of the world through Edward's eyes, and because of that, you see Hohenheim as this awful, imposing father who gave up on his family. And you think he's gonna be more of an antagonist than anything, even before the reveal that him and father are two different beings. Which I think is a big part of why it feels so novel when Hohenheim ends up being basically a main character. Really, this entire show past the halfway point is Hohenheim's story, and Edward and Alphonse are just caught up in it. And it's a really cool feeling seeing Hohenheim go from what you assume he is in your brain to what he actually is, which is maybe the biggest hero in the entire show. Without him, father would have just became God and then did whatever he wanted to do while being a god. He goes from this giant scary figure into this soft-spoken, introspective, sort of softy when you learn more about him. He's a really likable guy that knows he was instrumental in some really bad shit that's about to go down, has a really interesting backstory and extremely interesting ties to both sides of the conflict in his relationship to all of the homunculi and Edward and Alphonse. The entire story swings around the axis that is Hohenheim, and when the show started, I really wasn't expecting that. And yes, thank you all for the spoilers that this was indeed Hohenheim in opening 1. Do you know how many people just blasted off in saying that while I was still like 20 plus episodes away from possibly being able to realize that? I think the logic is that he dies because he used all of the souls that were inside him from Xerxes to make all of the Philosopher's Stones to counter Father's plans, right? So then his body starts rapidly failing. That was another one I had to think about, but I think that's probably it. Him dying in the end is an appropriate bookend for that entire story. The one thing I wish there was a little bit more of for Hohenheim is a bit more of a relationship with Edward in the end, though. I thought they'd come around to more even ground, and that would have been a great big moment for mostly Ed, but the show didn't go in that direction. I know Edward called him his father in an outburst, but I was hoping for more. This entire conflict is Hohenheim. So Father, all of the homunculi, everything that has to do with that centuries-old conflict, including Hohenheim, all dying in the end is cool with me, even though I ended up liking the guy a lot. Though, now that I think about it, does that mean there are just 6 Philosopher's Stones laying on the ground on the edges of the country? And finally, Debais, Edward and Alphonse, and the theme of self-sacrifice. With this last run of episodes not really focusing in on our main characters until the last 4 or 5 or so, my theory on them being basically where they were going to end up being character-wise was proven correct. And that's not a bad thing, as I discussed last video. I think Alphonse and Edward both have had decent little character arcs, though they may have been a little low-key for some people's taste. I didn't mind too much. But with the show finally closing out, where did they leave our 2 main characters? Well, I don't think you can talk about that without talking about the theme that has permeated the entire show, which is self-sacrifice. Doing good for another, or perhaps many others, to the detriment of yourself. It goes all the way back to the start, with the first human transmutation they tried to do. Edward unknowingly transmutes Al and sacrifices an arm and a leg to bring a soul back. Over and over this theme is explored. Alphonse willingly blocks horrible damage for people that can't defend themselves. Scar puts aside his feelings of hatreds towards the Emestrians to help them. Mustang wants to assume the role as Fuhrer so he can try the war criminals from the Ishval conflict, including himself. Alphonse realizing that the greater good is more important and using a Philosopher's Stone even though he swore he never would. Alphonse gives up his connection to the armor to buy back Edward's arm in the last moments of the final battle. Hohenheim is willing to give up his life and body to bring Alphonse back. Edward gives up his ability to interact with Alchemy to buy Alphonse's body back. All of these moments, and even more I haven't mentioned, are all because our characters see their own well-being as secondary to someone else's. Their selflessness in achieving their goals is the biggest thing that separates them from Father. Father constantly uses others to achieve his goals, whether it be the souls of the countries he's planning to sacrifice or the lives of his homunculus children. In the end, he's only looking out for himself. He is singular. No matter how many souls he absorbs, how many people he literally takes into his being, he is still infinitely less than our main cast because they have each other's backs. They might not do anything to win, but they will do anything to make sure their friends have the chance to win. And that's why Father loses. He can't do it all. He can't keep up with everyone, and everyone is there because of the strength of the character of our main characters. Edward and Alphonse and the love they have for each other, the fact that they will sacrifice themselves for something they believe in, rather than sacrificing others for something they want. And I think that's the cherry atop both of their characters to end this series out. They don't need to have giant revelations or massive twists. They just reach the epitome of what they are. They are their greatest, most genuine selves as the show reaches its climax. I think that's pretty sick. Like when Edward punched someone who was an all-powerful god a minute ago, and as far as he knows is still unknowably strong, and he says, "Get up, you novice." That was so sick. I was like, what the fuck? Edward's right. Everything Father has or has learned has been stolen. Edward has worked for all of his knowledge and strength. The two coming to blows are the 2 ways the show is set up to grow strong coming to blows, and Edward's winning out. This fight is selflessness versus selfishness. It's hard work versus taking the easy way out, and it's Edward versus Father. Oh, by the way, the reference shot to opening 2, chef's kiss. I think the climax captures perfectly what this show did so well with writing these 2 characters, and I think their endings were very nice, the both of them. I'll never get used to Alphonse's voice not having an echo to it, but my therapist and I can work that out later. I love the fact that they go their own separate ways to end it. I felt a lot in this show that Alphonse, though being interesting and important, never really had enough to do. He was always in Edward's shadow, and even in the times he and Edward did split up, it was still always Edward who had the more plot important stuff going on. Alphonse going east to Xing and Edward going west, both of them to learn more, really gave me the feeling that they had both come into their own over the course of this show. They're still brothers and still love each other, but these experiences have made them grow, both metaphorically and physically, and they can go it alone. They're strong enough to be apart, and they'll probably be better people for it in the future. Alphonse having his own story and adventure is something I really like for that character. It's the same with Edward, but he was already so headstrong and confident, but it's still a direction I like for him. This very well could have been the adventure of their lives, but their stories aren't over. There are still things Edward wants to learn and do. It feels like an ending, but it also feels like a new beginning. Going into the show, how was I not supposed to know how highly it was regarded? Most people who've seen it say this is one of the best anime out there. And I went in with open arms. I'd seen chunks of it, as you know, but the entire story was still a mystery to me. While yes, just like any other show, it has problems, and just like any other show I watch, I'm gonna have my own unique problems I take away from it. Those problems are heavily outweighed by the good. Unique and interesting characters, a unique and interesting world full of different peoples and conflicts and histories and myths and mysteries. And I really wasn't expecting for this whole thing to be basically one grand mystery. I'm not sure if I've ever watched a show like this that has just been one giant overarching question of what the hell is the main villain even doing? And while we're trying to answer that question, there are a bunch of smaller, though still important conflicts to solve. For me, it's such a new way for a show to handle things. I don't think I was even really prepared to view it in a way that it should be viewed. I kept thinking, wow, this show keeps posing more questions than it answers, and really worried about how it was going to tie it all up. But that's what the show was going for, that giant reveal at the end, and I really wasn't going in expecting to have to be ready for that. I like the show a lot, and this isn't supposed to be a dig or anything at it at all, but it strikes me as a show that's probably better upon a second watch through. So you can see the dots connected together, realize foreshadowing that went over your head, notice lines and hints that are there, but you don't know that are important. Even without that second watch through under my belt, I can see why this show is so highly regarded. When the show takes itself seriously, like it does the vast majority of the time outside of the opening handful of episodes, I think it has a great niche it places itself in of action-filled with a tad too much anime humor for me, but also politically and mostly story-driven, while also never forgetting the characters either. I think it does most everything of what it's trying to do very well, with only the occasional stumble here and there. I think Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood is a very good show. If you enjoyed this compilation, take a look at my channel. I'm doing very similar videos for a bunch of popular anime on an opening by opening basis, just like I did for this show. I'd still call myself an anime hater at this point, but I've come around on some shows. Not so much on others, though. Like the video if you liked it. Flame me in the comments if you think I'm an idiot. Subscribe if you want to do either of those things over and over again in the future. If you made it this far in this video, you'll probably like my other stuff, so check it out. Oh, and patrons, you know I love you. I had to cut the patron sections for the sake of the compilation moving smoothly, but your shoutouts are still immortalized in the shorter videos. Those aren't going anywhere. Okay, thanks for watching. Bye.